The night after the old lion rode out, Harrenhal sank into itself like a beast relieved of a rider and left to brood on its own ache. Fires smoldered in the courtyards. The kitchens exhaled their greasy breath. The air above the forges quivered from hammer heat, though no smith worked the bellows now. The stones held heat and old screams. Arya knew the ways of its corridors as if they were burrows through a hill where foxes might hide. She had scrubbed those floors, carried those jugs. She had learned, without anyone telling her, how to be so small that heavy boots stepped past her as if she were air. Jaqen found her where the scullions slept, near the barrel that sweated cold water on its staves. He stood at the door until the other children's breathing settled again. He had a cloak with a hood the color of smoke, and when he lowered it, his hair looked wet, reddish, streaked where a torch had licked across it. His eyes were winter river water, not quite gray, not quite blue, with flecks of something that shifted when he tilted his head. "A road opens," he said, as if they shared a map no one else could see. "A road east, if a girl wishes to walk it." She had wanted roads north since the day her father died. North to Rob. North to Winterfell and the God's Wood, where the heart tree bled red sap. But the world had taught her that wanting didn't make roads appear. Roads did not care. She had watched them divide and dwindle and vanish in marsh. She had learned to be the kind of creature that followed fences and crept through hedges and slipped from shadow to shadow. East was not north. East was water that tasted of salt and ships with hard new names. East was where Sirio's voice lived when she could not sleep. "The water dances, little cat." Arya could almost feel the old wooden swords between her fingers like warm bones. "What happens if I go east?" she asked, and she tried to make her voice careless, like she didn't already know she would go. "A girl goes where she is taken by the steps she chooses," he said with that soft amusement that never quite reached his eyes. "A man will see her to a door. Past the door, the steps are her own. Then tea. Will you stay with me?" "Until a certain door," he said. "Until the door is no longer mine to open." He never said her name. When he had said it once by accident, Arya, he had looked at it on his tongue as if it were a bit of glass he had nicked himself on. After that he did not cut himself again. She was a girl to him most often, and sometimes he spoke as if he were not himself at all. A man must move now. A man will trade this silence for that gate. It might have been a game he played with the world, or it might have been armor. A way to never be where you could be struck. They left Harrenhal at that blue hour before dawn, when everything is more itself because it is nearly inside the day. On the outer wall, watchmen sweating in iron looked everywhere but down. Jaqen took them along a lip of stone, over a gap bridged by a plank no wider than her hand, and into a yard where laundry ropes bowed under someone's white shirt that would never be white again. He had a way of moving that made things become passageways. She did not understand it. She only followed and learned. She was still not sure if she had needle. The thought came as a blanch of worry, as it always did when she couldn't feel the familiar weight. Then she remembered the tight strip of cloth inside her jerkin and the cool thin line against her ribs. She had wrapped needle in oiled rag and hid it like a treasure map she kept under her skin. The thought of the blade steadied her hands. If he forgot her name, at least the sword remembered it. They went out by the old cattle gate, down a rutted lane that smelled of milk and dung and damp ash. Behind them, Harrenhal loomed like a broken shield. In the field beyond the ditch, a dead horse bloated in dew, and crows took turns at its belly. Jaqen walked with the relaxed stride of a man on a city promenade. Arya matched him at a half-step, the place where she could copy the length of his reach and the angle of his footfall. He had whispered to her once in the pantry where the vinegar lived that the ground spoke, and feet answered, and good feet lied convincingly. They threaded hamlets where the war had already blown through and left its chilly draft. A cottage roof with a hole like a mouth open to the sky. A plow with one handle broken. A little square of herbs trampled into bitter perfume. Children watched them from doorways with eyes that had forgotten games. When they saw the smallness of her beside him, they came closer, expecting something. bread, a story, the flint trick of a coin behind an ear, and Jaqen gave them a glance that was not unkind and not promising. He could empty a space around himself by standing still inside it. Arya watched and learned that too. At a stream with stones like worn teeth, she crouched and drank from her hands. The water was clean, cold enough to hurt. "How far?" she asked. "Far enough to matter," he said. "Salt pans?" She guessed. Or Maidenpool. He had not told her a destination, but east meant water, and water meant ships, and she remembered the names of every town where a ship might take a girl to somewhere not Westeros. He did not deny it. He did not confirm it. He had a way of agreeing with the parts of a question that contained no assertion. She had tried to trick him once into saying something he didn't mean, and found that she had only tricked herself into listening harder. They camped in hedges and hyricks. Once, when they reached the black line of a wood at dusk, Jaqen stopped her with a hand that appeared and vanished like a moth's touch. He bent and showed her where the bracken had been broken ankle-high. A man's tread, hurried and careless, and where farther on a leaf had been turned to the wrong side at knee-height. A bowman carrying his string low. By then, Arya's whole self had become ear. She heard the night as a pattern of needle pricks on skin. Pricks that matched the pattern of her memories. Father's hand heavy on her head when he was pleased. Jon's laugh in the yard. Sansa singing once, not for the queen but to herself. And the yielding of the dough when she had made bread with hot pie, the way it pushed back at her thumb. Hot pie was west now, if he was anything at all. And Gendry too, going toward the blue smoke of the river forges, if he had his way. She had left because there had been nothing else to do but stay. She had not told them. There had been no time, and she had not wanted to listen to Gendry tell her not to go. And she had not wanted hot pie to look at her like she had taken the last crust twice. Guilt felt like a stone she had put in her own shoe, and now could not remove without admitting the hurt was hers. On the third day, Jaqen bought passage on a flat-bottomed barge, whose master wore a bent gold ring through the rim of his left ear, and a cap that had once been velvet. He paid in quiet. Arya did not see the coin change hands. She only saw the way the captain's caution unraveled into hospitality, and how the two knots of men on the bank, soldiers or outlaws born from soldiers, all at once found other things to discuss. She wondered if the coin was not a coin at all, but a way of holding his face when he looked at a man as if that man were already describing a memory. She had seen how he killed, the way he put death in a room and let the room do the work. This was like that, only gentler. The river carried them like a road set to moving. Rushes along the bank glistened with midges. Kingfishers cracked the air. A woman on the far bank bent to her washing and straightened and bent again. And each time the cloth struck the rock, it sounded like a drum for a ceremony. No one had been invited to attend. In a ruined village, a seven-pointed star had fallen and wedged in the mud like a ship's tattered sail. Jaqen sat with his back against a barrel and carved something from a stick with the smallest of knives. Shavings gathered like pale fish scales at his boot. He hummed in a language that was not the common tongue, not the sing-song of the summer isles, not the watery syllables of Braavos she remembered from Sirio's mouth. She asked him once what he had sung. He smiled as if the sound had not been his. The barge reached salt pans when the tide was halfway in, the coastal flats revealing their glossy labyrinth of channels and pools. The town smelled of dried fish and tar, and the iron tang of seaweed. Gulls made the air chisel sharp with their cries. Jaqen led her through a tangle of streets, where the houses leaned as if straining to see the water, and stopped at an inn with a painted board that showed a silver eel. He spoke with the innkeep, who had shoulders like barrels. She thought he must be speaking of rooms, but the man shook his head, then shook it again in a different way. Jaqen's voice did not change. The innkeep's did. In the end, a boy carried them bowls of stew, and after that, a woman found them a corner by the hearth. Jaqen slept while sitting. He did not lean. Arya crouched next to his folded coat and watched the flames take apart a whole day's worth of driftwood. And when the inn's door opened once to let in air as cold and clean as a blade after whetstone, she thought of Winterfell and had to bite the inside of her cheek against an ache that belonged to hunger. and something else both. The ship was called the Jala's Grace, though the first letter on her nameboard had been so heavily repainted that it might once have been something else. The captain was a slant-bellied man with long legs and a white streak through his beard like a lightning scar. He spoke a slurred Braavosi to his crew and a precise command to his passengers. On the second morning, when the tide ran fast enough to cheat even the cautious rocks, they went out past the last pilings and the last nets, and the sea opened like a cod's mouth under a hook. Arya had thought she was ready for it because she had watched it from shore and imagined herself big and brave upon it. The first swell made her knees loose. The second made her a supplicant, kneeling at the rail with her arms braced and her head lowered. The sea took everything she had eaten that morning and asked if she had anything else to give. She did. Jaqen did not seem to match her to the hours. He stood when she fell. He took hold of her braid when the ship lurched so that she would not give the narrow sea more than lunch. He spoke in a tone that would have suited a conversation in a garden. Later, when darkness fell and the ship became a moving ring of light in a country of black glass, he brought her a cup of something bitter and sweet and told her to sip it and then to hold it in her mouth. The taste bled into her tongue and slowed the pitch of the deck under her feet. She slept like a coil of rope in a locker. There were days when the sea lay like blue silk and the Jala's Grace walked, easy as a horse under a rider who knew her. There were days when the wind fretted and the sail beat and the rigging sang, and the sky had two colors, both the color of bone. Men cursed, and it sounded like prayer. Arya chased cats that did not exist and rolled a ball down a plank to learn how the floor would move before it moved. She watched a sailor tie and untie knots until her fingers memorized the pattern. The captain taught her the names of what the ship wore as if it were a woman: stays, sheets, clues, leeches. Jaqen taught her the names of what a face wore: patience, confidence, disregard, expectation, hunger. He would sit and start a story not at the beginning, but at the third turning. And she would have to ask the first question to find the first scene. And once she had asked it, she would see that the question had been the point. What becomes of a wolf in a city of masks? She asked one day when the sea had gone green and the air smelled of something far away but already decided. A clever wolf eats bread and says nothing while she eats it, he said. Then she plays with the dog that keeps the baker's yard until the dog is her friend and the baker is less afraid of the wolf. When men speak in the street, she listens and does not ask for the names they do not give, because they will give them if they are supposed to. She learns to walk like a fishmonger when she wants to smell of fish, and like a boy from the quays when she wants to be invisible. She does not forget how to run. He smiled a small smile. She does not forget she has teeth. The storm that reminded her she was very small came 4 days out from Braavos, or 6. On the sea, days fray and share edges. The sky grew sideways. The wind came not from a direction but from intent, and the Jala's Grace leaned away from it like a woman refusing a kiss. Arya learned how ropes could burn palms. She learned how breath had to be counted, when spray is the same as rain, and both have teeth. At one point, the bow went down and did not come up for a while. That might have been a lifetime. She thought of the black gate in the crypts at Winterfell, and how the cold there had been a cold that never moved, and she told herself that if she could bear still cold, she could bear moving cold. One could beat the other by being in her bones already. Jaqen was everywhere he needed to be an instant before he needed to be there. He did not command. The captain commanded, roaring in his precise command with lightning in his beard. But when a line whipped free and needed a hand that would not mind the sting, Jaqen's hand was there, and when the sail had to be taken in past the usual stubbornness, Jaqen was the man who had the body of a boy on a beam. Afterward, when the storm was something they spoke of as if it were a person who had visited and insulted them, the crew looked at Jaqen with that recognition men give to isles that are not on maps, but exist all the same. The first time she saw the Titan of Braavos, it was not his face she saw, but the shadow his body cast across the mouth of the lagoon. The ship moved into that shadow, as into a story. The Titan's fire lived in his head like a small sun. His bronze plates had tasted so much salt, they no longer shone. and even at that distance she felt the hum of the chains that held him to the low islands. He made a sound. Of course he did. Everyone told the tale. Ships that came in heard him. Some pretended to fear he would step, but the sound he made was not one step, but every step since men learned to hammer bronze upon a curve. Braavos was not a city so much as the idea of a city that water had agreed to become. Canals ran like the handwriting of a neat clerk. Bridges wrote answers over them in stone, in wood, in a kind of green-painted iron that had one day been black. Houses grew from the water with their toes in it, each with a door that greeted boats, and a door that greeted streets. The air smelled of lemon, pitch, salt, smoke. A richer, cleaner smoke than Harrenhal's, though not kinder. There were bells. Some told the hour. Some told fortune. Some told lies out of habit, because bells liked to be in men's heads, and did not care how. They did not go to the ragman's harbor. Jaqen guided her off the Jala's grace with a nod and a word, and the kind of coin that left little ripples in the captain's pleasure. And they took a skiff with a ferryman whose face had as many lines as a chart. He pulled them along a narrow waterway, where the buildings leaned so close that the sky was diced into small squares. He did not ask where they were going. He collected the coin without counting it. He had fairy face. The face that knows everything that passes and knows better than to know it. The door was two doors joined together. One side white wood pale as bone, the other black as the inside of a well. It was set into a house that might have been a merchant's, and might have been a small temple, and might have been a shed for boats. There was no sign, no bell string, no notice of hours. On the threshold, Arya felt a coolness that was not air. She knew it from her dreams, from the time she had said names in whispers, until the names turned into breath, and then into sleep. The coolness of a thing that is not a room, although it is in a room, although it is in a room, a thing that is patient because it does not move. Jaqen knocked one time. The sound was not a knock. It was a question, asked in wood. When the door opened, there was nobody visible behind it, only a hall of polished stone and low wells of water that held the sky. The smell was faint and old. Oil, incense, forgotten flowers. Jaqen motioned her in. His smile was not comforting. Comfort belonged to places where one promised things. "Pass this way," he said. "Will you come?" she asked. "As far as this way," he said. "Beyond, other voices will teach." Something in her leaped, like heart in throat. Like having needle in her hand before she had promised herself she would not use it. She felt suddenly, fiercely, the wrongness of being without him. This strange man who had been both guide and danger and mirror. It surprised her enough that she did not speak. She stepped inside and did not look back, because if she looked, she would hope, and if she hoped she would be weak with it. The hall widened into a space that was more outside than a room. There were pools, low and many. There were candles few and far between. Faces looked down from pillars. No, not faces carved, not entirely. She told herself they were carvings, and then told herself not to tell herself anything yet. When the soft footfalls approached, she thought for a moment it might be Sirio, because some walk writes itself into your memory and will not be erased. But Sirio would have announced himself louder. Smiling. This man's smile, when it came, was not in the mouth, but in the absence of hurry in the bones. "You have brought us a child," he said to Jaqen. The old man, if old he was, had skin that had forgotten about time and white in his hair that might have been chalked on by a jester. His eyes were a brown so faded that only the shadows made them borders. He looked at Arya not like a baker looks at a small thief, and not like a knight looks at a squire. He looked at her as if she were a room he was thinking of entering later. "I have brought you a question," said Jaqen. "And what answer does the question prefer?" the old man asked mildly. "To be unasked," Jaqen said, and the old man's mouth made that little curve that might once have been laughter. "Leave her then," said the old man, still looking at Arya. "We will not treat her as your question. We will treat her as herself, until she is not." Jaqen inclined his head. An agreement struck not with the man, but with the air. He looked at Arya once. There was nothing in the look that would feed an empty belly. Then he stepped back across the sill where the coolness ran like water. And when she glanced toward the seam of the black and white door, he had become another part of the city's quiet and was gone. The old man took her to a small chamber and left her a basin and a cake of soap and a folded length of plain linen that was not quite a dress and not quite a shift. He told her where to find water that was for washing and water that was for listening. He told her where to put the clothes she had been wearing and the shoes that had been feet to her for too long. He did not tell her his name, and she did not ask. She washed with the care of a soldier cleaning a blade after work, not out of modesty, but because she knew the skin was armor, and the armor had to be sound. The water was so still, she could see her face, and when she leaned close to make a better joke to herself about messy hair and worse nose, she found that the water blurred her features as if it preferred some other arrangement. She drew back and tied her hair with a strip of linen from some older garment that had dyed and been made useful. The first task they gave her was sweeping. She had swept Harrenhal, and before that, the kitchen yards at Winterfell, when Septa Mordane had wanted the girls to learn that their hands could be employed as well as lectured. The straw broom had a large, gentle voice here. The dust did not rise. It accepted its fate. The sound of the broom moving over stone made a line inside the day on which she could walk. No one hurried her, and no one praised her, and no one told her she had done it poorly. She had learned that nothing could be as kind as being ignored if it meant you were permitted to remain. Later, a woman brought her a wooden bowl of stew, and a heel of bread, and a cup of water. The woman had a face so calm it could have been a wall. But when she set down the food, she let her fingers brush the rim of the bowl in a way that was either clumsiness or a signature. Arya ate, because food meant strength, and strength meant being able to move when it was time and being still when it was time. She tried to keep from tasting. She could not help tasting. The stew was lamb, and it had the oil of olives in it, and the sweetness of something that had seen sun. She felt herself untie inside. Then she tied herself again, because untied ropes lose ships. When she slept, she dreamed of faces she had known, and faces she had struck, and faces she had watched die. In the dream, the faces were on walls, and they turned and watched her with the patient interest of houses. She woke with the taste of iron in her mouth. A curved window showed a pale square of light. The room had the kind of darkness that means a place will always be dark, even at noon. She found the old man, kindly, perhaps, if one wanted a name that did not pretend to truth. In a room where the air tasted faintly of apple skins and of a sharp oil that lived in little bottles. On tables lay instruments that were not for music and not for kitchens. They were for the taking apart of ordinary mistakes. He was teaching a boy how to wipe down a knife that had a rounded end, slow and correct, as if a wrong swipe would erase a word from a prayer. "Who are you?" the old man asked Arya with the absent-minded softness of someone who has thrown a stick and knows the dog will bring it. For an instant, the list of names that lived in her throat rose like a school of fish under a tossed crumb. Arya. Arya of Winterfell. Arya Stark, daughter of Eddard and Catelyn, sister to Robb and Sansa and Bran and Rickon, friend to the butcher's boy who had died, friend to Gendry and Hot Pie, pupil of Jon who had given her needle. The list of their names. The list of the other names, the hard ones she had said in the straw. Each night, until her jaw ached, she swallowed those. Bridges were for crossing. You did not stop on them and count planks unless there was a reason. "I'm no one," she said, and found to her hot surprise that she hated the feel of the words. The hatred was small, like a burr in a glove. It would do. "Yes," he said, as if she had told him the weather. "And no but to." He nodded to the broom in her hand. "She will sweep the steps inside, and then the steps that lead to the water, and then the steps where the quiet ones sit. She will not speak to the quiet ones. She will watch when the living come to pray, and she will watch when the dying come to drink. She will sleep when she is told, and wake when she is woken. She will learn the tongue that floats on the canals, and the tongue that hides in the markets, and the tongueless speech of a face that lies with grace. He looked past her at no one. "She will leave if she is bored." "I won't be bored," Arya said at once. The old man let the tiniest breath of amusement escape. A promise she makes to herself, not to us. The work loved repetition for its own sake. Arya found that the body did not mind doing the same small right thing if it was permitted to stop asking the wrong large questions. She swept. She fetched water in a bucket with a wooden handle that squeaked like a field mouse. She watched the quiet ones, who might have been monks or beggars or lords if one moved the beads of the abacus of the world and counted differently. She watched the people who came to pray at the pools. A woman kneeling in a yellow dress whose hem had been carefully patched. A bent man with hair like a worn brush. A guard from the Sea Lord's own men, though he had left off his colors to be a supplicant like any other. And when he drank from the cup, the woman with the calm face held to his lips. Arya saw the exact minute relief that comes when a long pain loosens its hold. It was not magic. It was a debt paid. The many-faced God, the old man said once, gives many gifts. Each has a price. Arya did not say that everything had a price. She continued to sweep. On the second week, or what she thought was the second, because the bells told time as the canals told distance only to those who lived there, the woman with the calm face took Arya by a stair she had not noticed, and into a vaulted room where brass lamps hung like fruit from black branches. The air was cool there. The walls took heat and donated it elsewhere. The woman opened a chest and showed Arya a set of little bottles in a tray of dark wood. "Name them," she said, and gave names Arya had never heard before that tasted of mint or stone, or the underside of a coin. The woman made her repeat the names, not to her, but to the bottles, as if the bottles cared who knew their letters. Then she taught Arya how to hold the dropper above a cup and let a single, stubborn, round bead of liquid gather until gravity changed its mind and took it. "What are they for?" Arya asked. "For the giving of mercy," said the woman. "What are they?" Arya persisted. "To be used as they should be," the woman said. The tone was not scolding. It was like explaining to rain that it was wet. In the afternoons, if the house had no tasks for her hands, Arya was turned out into the city, as a dog is put out to make its own circles. She learned to cross bridges so narrow that a careless elbow could end a day. She learned to keep her feet on stone that shone with algae. She learned the names of 5 different fried fish sold out of paper bags, and which boatmen preferred coin and which would take a joke, and which jokes paid better than coin. She learned the moods of the tides and which wines pushed against the city as if it were a door. She learned that Braavos had 100 statues and that people had arranged their worship around them in ways that intertwined with selling. She learned that the row of courtesans in their bright boats were their own kind of knights, and that people spoke of one called the Black Pearl as of a figure in a song. She learned the word for knife in Tyroshi and Myrish, and made herself forget the words when she went back to the house, because withholding felt like training. The first time a hand found her braid without her leave, the hand did not return to its owner with the same working joints. The man shouted and called her names from 5 cities. Arya's breath ran fast and embarrassed. She prayed briefly to a god she did not love that no one from the house had seen. Later the old man. Kindly, some part of her insisted on calling him because you must call even your fear something, gave her a small kettle filled with lead shot, and she carried it up and down stairs until her arms shook. "Be a better hand," he said. "Then hurt yourself less when others are worse." At night she spoke to John in the space between waking and sleep. She asked what he would say if he knew where she was. She asked whether he would call her brave for walking into a house where the dead were honored with water and silence. She asked if he would tell her it was wrong to turn herself into a blade for someone else's hand. Once she asked Father what he would think. The silence that answered that question had the weight of frost on fences. She recited her list very quietly, and heard only the last name echo back. Time made other rooms for her. There was a lower chamber with a wall that might have been a wall of faces if she had believed in such tales. She did not yet. To believe was to fall forward. She stepped with care and learned to see without deciding what she saw. The woman with the calm face. "Call me no name," she had said when Arya tried once to make the air simpler. ought her to move as if her bones were beads strung on a cord, small shifts, minute alignments. A boy with the watchful hands cleaned the tools and taught her how not to nick herself on their echoes. A man with a scar like a bent nail at his mouth showed her a game with stones on a grid that was not about winning but about learning where a piece wanted to go 3 moves from now. They all asked her, sometimes and suddenly, who she was. She learned to answer with a shrug that meant less than nothing, or with a courtesy that belonged to a girl who was no one in particular, and pleased to be so. Once Jaqen returned, as if he had merely stepped out to fetch bread. He came into the courtyard where the water knew more stars than the sky because it remembered them better, and he stood beside her as if they had parted an hour before. He looked different in some way that would not be captured by a list of features. A color, an emphasis, a new habit for where the eyes rest when listening. He had been someone else. He always was. She wanted to say, "You left me," and the child in her who had been left with a sewing needle and told to be a lady tightened her mouth against it. "Are you?" She stopped. There was no question after, "Are you?" that he would answer. He smiled the way a cat might if it had to. "A girl has learned the stairs," he said, and looked at her hands. "And the city," she said, because he had meant for her to say a thing she had not been asked. "And the city," he agreed. He leaned where the stone gave shade. "They will send you in the city soon." He did not say to do what. He did not have to. "Will you go with me?" she asked, and then wished she had not but was glad she had. "I will go where I am sent," he said, "which is often where I have already been." "Do you ever go home?" He thought about the word. "There are houses with doors," he said gently. "There are faces I have kept." He gestured, the tiniest move. "There is the taste of sauces in certain streets when one is hungry. Those are homes. And nothing else." "And nothing else," he said, without bitterness or comfort. When he left again, she did not watch. She went to the room where brass lamps turned the dark into green, and read a scrap of writing the house had pressed into her hand, with the calm woman's face behind it. She could read enough of the canal's tongue now to make it a song for herself. A man had taken a grief he could not pay to the house, and had given coin for mercy. The house would send someone who would take the grief and end it. A test. She understood without deciding she understood. Not yet hers. But close, like a rain cloud deciding where to fall. At the market near the Iron Bank, its windows held more sky than the sky did. She began to work at listening as a craft. She bought a handful of roasted chickpeas because it gave her a reason to stand with her back to a whitewashed wall and look down. She wore her hair under a cap that made her a boy again, as if that older field of battle could be walked again to make new tracks. She watched how the guards moved, how the clerks' fingers danced on abacuses, how courtiers walked with the careful wastefulness of men who had never had to wait for anything and had been much praised for it. She watched a Westerosi trader whose shoes were wrong for the cobbles, and whose face had the hard lines of a man surprised by the cost of something he thought he'd already bought. He argued in common with a Braavosi man who smiled as if the smile were a brace for a toothache. Robb Stark. Someone said behind her shoulder, not to her. The words went into her with the precision of a needle. She did not turn. She crunched a chickpea. She waited for the rest. "Blackfish with him," said the same voice. "Riverman, smart as an eel. Red hair woman the queen, you saw that one? A smear of Volantine and bravado. They say the north will be a separate thing with a wolf crown if the boy can keep his knights from fighting each other. Tell me he cannot make milk curdle in a merchant's bowl from across the sea. Laughter. I will sell you 2 ships and wish him health while we fit them with new masts." A hand moved, a coin glinted. The day breathed. Arya let out the breath she'd forgotten to keep. She did not chase the voice. There were 1,000 voices. If hers made a sound now, it would not be a sound the house had asked her to make. She swallowed the salt in the back of her mouth, and thought of a hall with a heart tree made of marble. The place where her mother might sit in a dream. If dreams could be told where to go. Her hands wanted to find needle. She folded them under her arms instead, and ate another chickpea, as if it mattered very much. As the weeks laid their tiles, the house took more of her questions and gave her more of its tasks. She scrubbed the stone near pools that never stayed clean because prayers leave their own residue. She learned how to see illness in a face like a story partly told. Yellow where there should have been pink. Shine where there should have been matte. Tint under the eyes that comes when sleep and pain hire the same bed. She carried cups. She held hands. She learned to look without pity and without hardness, both of which were ways of making herself important. She learned to vanish while standing. She went with a calm-faced woman to a rower's cottage where the wife had already said goodbye in every language she knew and had come at last to silence, and watched as the woman put a drop from a little bottle on the man's waiting tongue. He closed his eyes like someone who had heard his name called at last, and when his breathing smoothed into the line under a sleeping infant's smile, Arya let the quiet loosen a knot inside her she had not even named. Later she found a corner of the courtyard and shook as privately as she could. The old man came and stood near and did not say anything like comfort. After a long while he said, "The world is heavy. The work we do is one way of learning which parts of the weight belong to us." "Which parts do?" she asked, because he had meant for her to. "The ones you are best at carrying," he said, with that ghost of amusement again. "The rest belong to another." On the day they let her drink the water that had skimmed the pool's surface since before she had been born, the city smelled of oranges and coal smoke, and the iron of a storm held off by a wind that had changed its mind. The water was cool, and it found the inside of her mouth as if it had been there before. She drank and felt something tally itself in her, not a debt, but an account opened, a sum that could be added to later. She waited for fire or music. There was neither. There was a small, sure quiet. When she walked into the street after, the canal looked at her as it always had. A child tried to sell her a spray of basil and a paper cone of sugared almonds. She bought both, one to taste and one to carry, to dust her fingers with sweetness. A gull settled on the prow of a moored boat and made a joke of ownership. Men argued about the price of purple dye in Tyrosh. These were all the miracles, unchanged and complete. In the corner of the market, a boy with a smith's shoulders and unshaved jaw argued poorly for a price not unfavorable to himself. He had a way of standing that put his weight on the leg that would push forward if needed. Arya felt the world contract until the stalls made a narrow lane. She turned away before she had decided to, and stood with her back to a rack of oranges, their skins poured and brilliant. She listened. His voice was lower than it had been. She could find 100 wrong gendries here and train her heart to move, but this one had the right ugliness in one knuckle. He slapped a coin into a palm, and the palm closed on it. And when he turned, annoyed with no particular person, she saw the scar at his hairline from a blow he had not ducked. He walked away into a new street. She stood until her limbs remembered they belonged to a face that was not hers. That night she took up the broom and swept the same stones again and again, and she said her list very softly, and at the end, she tasted a new name without letting it out. Braavos had a way of noticing the words you wanted to hide with more interest than the ones you shouted. She learned to hold her names as if they were drops of the house's syrups, each weight precise, each timing correct. When the old man gave her a scrap of rough paper with an address inked on it, and the smallest of drawings, a signboard, a slice of street, she looked at nothing in particular for a long time, and then looked at him. "No," she said. "Soon," he said. "Wear new feet." She slept lightly, as she had at Harrenhal, as she had under hedges with Jaqen breathing like a story beside her. She woke when the house did, and ate when it put food where her hands would find it. She washed her face in water that had looked at many faces. She wrapped her hair up under a cap that belonged on a girl who sold cherries by the handful. She looked at herself in a scrap of polished metal and let herself be someone else with a mouth that smiled more than hers would, and a way of walking that would make grown men underestimate her and grown women give her the right kind of attention. "Do not choose a clever plan," the calm-faced woman said as they stood by the door. "Choose the obvious plan somebody else believes first. What if they don't? Then you should have chosen a better obvious plan." Arya laughed despite herself, a small breath. And the woman's mouth admitted being a mouth and not a wall for the width of a fingernail. The doors, white and black panels, watched her pass. Outside, the city had turned its cheek toward the sun and asked for mercy and warmth. A boy sang the word for knives in 3 languages without offering any, because the song was what he sold. In a window, a woman brushed her hair and counted her strokes with her lips before remembering not to. An old man taught a cat not to beg, and the cat learned and forgot and learned again. She walked toward the address on the paper. She would pass it once and look at it as if it were nothing. She would pass it twice and be thirsty and drink from a pump where the water splashed on her shoes. She would pass it a 3rd time and become the girl who needed a length of string and went into the wrong door by accident. She would say something that would make the woman inside think of her own daughter in a city far away. She would be seen because she wanted to be seen. And then, she would be no one again. Under her tongue, the water waited like a promise not yet shaped into words. In her pocket, her hand brushed a coin she had not asked for and had not been told to use. She breathed in the smell of lemon and pitch and stone taking warmth. She thought, for no reason she could have explained, of John watching a wall of ice turn blue under sunrise. She thought she would be brave. She thought she would be cruel. She thought she would be both at once, and that would be the same as being a blade. She did not say her names. She did not need to. They were there, patient as the tide outside the Titan's shadow, counting the seconds until it could come in and erase the lines on the sand only so that others could be drawn again. When the door she had been given opened, it did so with the indifference of every door in Braavos that had opened that day. The house breathed out spiced air, the mild smell of linen warmed by a sunlit window, and the quickness of fear hidden in a corner. Arya smiled as the girl with cherries would. She stepped in with the sound of a child's small foot turning into the sound of anyone's foot. In her bones, the long roads of Winterfell and Harrenhal, and hemp-hung river barges, and ship decks that steamed under rain, and the dark cool hall, with its patient water, braided themselves into one thing called a step. Somewhere, in a chamber with ceilings that listened, the old man would be playing a game with stones against himself, and winning. Somewhere, walking across a roof so narrow a cat would complain of it, Jaqen would be another face in another good coat. Somewhere in the market by the bank, a smith's apprentice who was not apprenticed to anyone anymore would drink cheap wine out of a tin cup and think of the first thing he had ever made that had not fallen to pieces in his hand. Here, in this doorway, Arya began the habit of a new answer. It would not be the last. It would be one of many. Her hand was steady. The house had taught her that steadiness was not a virtue so much as a tool. She would be taught more. She would find where her weight belonged. The world could be carried if you did not lie about what it was made of. She smiled again, the smile of a girl who had a pocket full of cherries to sell and a place to sleep if she sold enough. The woman inside the room smiled back without meaning to. The day changed slightly, the way a room does when somebody opens a window. Outside, a bell stripped itself into notes and fell away into the city's noise. The water went on speaking in its own language. The Titan stood where he had stood and would stand. The steps behind her kept their dust. The steps ahead kept their dust too. She would sweep them when it was time. She would leave them unswept when it was not. She moved her weight forward. She placed her foot. She already belonged. Okay. End. The woman's smile made a soft room of her face, a tucking away of fears under the corners of her mouth, something mothers do without thinking when a child steps into sunlight. She was not old and not young. She wore the kind of dress that has surrendered to labor everywhere. Plain weave, stubborn seams, dyed a color that might once have been yellow, and had since been boiled in steam and spice and regret until it became only itself. She had a spoon in her hand, and the spoon made a small sound against the rim of a pot that sat on a trivet in the entry hall, as if she had brought the kitchen forward to receive visitors, because turning one more corner had become too much to ask of her legs. "You again," she said, which was brave of her, because it implied that time could be arranged like cups on a shelf, this one after that one, in their proper order, with cherries. With cherries, Arya said. Cheerful and thoughtless. Because the cherry girl did not know anything about the price of vows. She had a paper cone in her hand, folded just so, with a twist that kept the fruit from leaping out when she ran. She had smudged a bit of cherry on her thumb and left it there because no cherry girl ever stopped to keep herself tidy. Sweet as a new promise. Want to taste? Bendy. The woman reached to take one, and then remembered where her hand had been, and turned to wipe it on her skirt, and then remembered where her skirt had been, and let the hand hover instead. Her eyes moved toward the far room without moving her head. From that room came a sound like two saws working against each other without wood between them. Breath rasping against the thing that held it. The spiced air had a sweetness under it, the kind that lives in cloth when someone has been put to bed for too many days. A stain of sour. Linen warming on a chair back, yes, and also the animal smell of a body, trying to be both here and not here. Just one, the woman said at last. She took the cherry by its stem and put it into her mouth, as if it were a word she might regret. Her teeth met the stone. She flushed, whether from the sweetness or the mistake. How much? For you, Arya said, and widened the smile a fraction, because the cherry girl knew which graces bought goodwill. The price of a sip of water if you have it. The woman laughed, that little sound mothers make when they are tired and surprised. They can still make sounds. Always water. She lifted a pitcher from a table that had one leg shorter than the others and poured into a cup, with a crack in the glaze that had chosen not to be a leak. Arya held the cup in both hands and drank as if it had been the thing in the world she most desired. She did not look toward the room where the breathing had its argument. She did not flick her eyes to the iron hook near the door where a man's short cloak hung still damp at the hem. She had seen it already, how the dye had licked it, a saffron stain giving way to a brownish. The sign on the street had been a comb of hammered copper with teeth too fine for hair. Dyer's dyed. Cloth. Patterns. Taut. If she had walked farther into the house, she would have found wooden paddles and vats where women's arms turned red to the elbow. She would have found laughter in the corners from better months. She looked instead at the woman's work-thick fingers, the torn cuticle, the little nick on the web between thumb and palm that had bled and been licked without the time to fetch a rag. Good cherries, Arya said, from the gardens by the purple harbor. Wind made them blush quick. My daughter loves cherries, the woman said. She said it like someone who declares a small sovereign state. But she's gone to her aunt and cousin on the Green Canal to fetch thread. She touched her own hair, the reflex of women when some other woman is invoked in the house. Tomorrow. Dot. Come tomorrow, and I'll buy 2 cones. They. Tomorrow, Arya said, and made a small bob with her head. Because girls who run for their bread bob, their heads to the lady of the house and to the house itself. She backed to the door, and when the house breathed out at her again, the spiced air ran a finger down her spine like a reminder. She did not turn to look into the far room. That would have been a wrong cherry girl. She went out into a street narrowed by sun. The paper cone was light in her hand. She ate a cherry because the cherry girl would. The juice ran down her knuckle. She licked it, quick, so as not to waste. She became stone where a narrow bridge met a wide street and let the people wash around her. She looked at the house again without quite looking. The sign of the copper comb, the narrow slit of a window with linen tacked inside it against dust, the way the door had a second latch that turned on a pivot of blackened wood, homemade, decent, stubborn. Then she turned her head toward a canal where a fishmonger had made a bright ruin of silver scales at his feet and shouted his inventory as if each fish were the name of someone who owed him a favor. She ran. She sold the rest of the cherries to a pair of apprentices who had made themselves important with their belts. She laughed with a girl who wore a green ribbon and lied about how she had found it. On the water. Floating, delivered by a kindly god. She bought a single plum with her last tiny coin because a plum is the kind of extravagance a cherry girl would dare when nobody who matters is watching. When she crossed the threshold of the house whose door was half black wood and half white, the cool rolled over her again. She let the plum be a memory, and put that memory in the place where she put other food she could not eat. The woman with the calm face stood in the corridor, where the light had made a long, low lake across the stone. The woman did not ask what Arya had seen. She did not ask what Arya had not seen. She raised her eyebrows by the width of a thread. Arya nodded, once, as if to herself. In the chamber with instruments that were not for kitchens, the old man sat with a tree of brass lamps making dawn where he wished for it. He had a little book open with no writing in it, only rows of lines that looked like fishermen's nets set to dry. He glanced up when Arya entered. The glance was as warm as bread set near a fire, and as uninterested in being thanked. "She will go again," he said. It was not a question. "She will go again," Arya said. She stood without shuffling. Boys and girls in other houses might have been told to sit. Here there were days when standing taught more. "Who lives there?" he asked, with a mild application of interest, as if he were asking which way the tide ran in the little canals. "Dire folk," she said. "The smell says saffron and madder, and what it hides is vinegar. A woman who smiles because she can. A man who breathes like a saw without wood. A daughter who loves cherries. She was away to the Green Canal. The house could be hurt by money or death. Both are already inside." The old man's mouth allowed itself that small curve. "And the house door. Too good for the street," Arya said. "The lock on the back is older than the front. They spent coin on the front to spite a worry." "Who paid for the front?" he asked. "A father who thought he would live long enough to buy a better," Arya said, and found that the answer pleased her in an odd way, as if she had been allowed to give a name to a stray dog. The old man closed the small book without marking his place. "People pray where their hands are," he said. "On the stone by the pool. On wood by a bed. On the handle of a door. When they bring their prayer here, we consider it. When they cannot come, we decide if the prayer should be carried back to them." He reached a hand, not the kind of hand that commanded, but the kind that made a gesture like putting a cup within reach, and the calm-faced woman set in it a small vial protected in a sleeve of leather, stopper sealed with wax the color of old teeth. "Offer is not force," he said to Arya. "Offer is not a story you tell yourself about a duty. Offer is water, given to a thirsty mouth if the mouth opens. Do not pour." Arya reached, and the vial surprised her with its weight. It was like lifting a promise. Small, complete. She thought of the rower's cottage and the wife who had already said goodbye in every tongue, and how the calm-faced woman had tipped the cup, and the man had breathed out as if he had been running his whole life and could stop at last. She thought of the dyer's house and the woman who had made a room with her smile for a cherry girl who was nobody and nothing. "She will not speak of us," the old man said. "She will speak as a girl who knows where kindness is kept. She will say only what such a girl could know." "Nine." "A man," Arya said before she could help herself, and then stopped, heat rising in her face. She had not wanted to do what Jaqen did simply because he had done it. The old man's eyes went as still as those small wells of water in the hall. "Men do as they must," he said. "No rebuke in it. Children do what they can. A daughter of a dead lord does what she will call chance. A girl of the canals does what she learned from a woman with a ladle." He did not look at the vial in her hand because looking would have made it too important. "Go with her." Arya went. The house taught her how to go without making a space around the going. She wrapped the vial in a cloth that smelled faintly of the oil. The brass lamps drank. She tucked the cloth inside the lining of the cap she wore as a cherry girl, because nobody touches a girl's cap in Braavos. It is as private as her pocket, and the city has rules worse thieves obey. She walked out into the day that had become other people's evening. The light had leaned toward red. The gulls had gathered to discuss ships without having read the manifests. A boy raced past with a hoop, and the pleasure of the race made a sound in his throat that had not yet learned how to be a man's joy. At the corner near the canal with the good stone steps that do not ice as badly in winter, she saw the Black Pearl's barge go by. Not the woman, but her boat. Black lacquer, gilt in a restraint that is the most expensive thing you can wear. Men along the bank turned their faces as sunflowers do. The oarsmen pulled together, smooth. There were scents on the wind from the barge. Orange peel, roses, a ghost of pepper. Arya stored the detail as she stored other details now, like kindling. Sirio had taught her to watch hands. The house taught her to watch the air. The copper comb hung dull as if it had learned to be a coin for a poorer man. Arya knocked as a cherry girl knocks. Brisk, not meek, not bold. The woman opened at once this time, and then blinked as if the distance between opening and finding had shortened unexpectedly. She smiled, because she had taught her face to do that. She held the door wider, as if the cherry girl had been invited the day before, and had come late and needed forgiveness. "Tomorrow," Arya said, letting her delight be small and self-important, because the cherry girl should be pleased to be recognized in a city of faces. "I said tomorrow." But a girl went by the green canal and found the cherries sweeter on this side. She held up the cone. "Half for you. Half for the daughter when she comes home." "They've come home," the woman said. The way she said it told Arya that "they" did not include the man whose breath made its work across the threshold of the far room. "My sister said I was foolish to spend on cherries when we could get good turnips for less." The woman laughed and covered her mouth with the back of her wrist to make it quiet. "Your cap," she added, as if to make another sound to push the first away. "It's pretty." "Who made it for you?" Arya touched the cap as a girl would. Proud, careless. An old aunt with knotted fingers. "She died birthing her 10th. They say the many-faced God is kinder to those who have done their share. And to those who have no one to do it for them," the woman said softly. She turned her head, listening. The breathing in the inner room had shortened, made a new pattern. Saws set aside, a rasp at the edge of the whetstone. "Will you?" She began, and then stopped. "There are old women who bring cups from the temple," she said instead. "Words too fast now, apologizing to each other for being alive. But they walk slow, and the day has been long, and my husband, he is a good man from a family that didn't always have enough salt. No, but he never raised his hand to me, and he never took a copper that didn't belong to him. And he taught our boy," her breath snagged, "taught our boy to hold a paddle the right way, and the boy's gone now to the summer isles on a trader who buys corn now to the summer isles on a trader who buys purple, and he'll come back only if the God will, if the God." "You can go as quick as a child can go." She stopped and looked at Arya as if she had looked at her before, as if there was something to see besides a cap and a paper cone, and a face assembled to be looked at. "There is a pool," Arya said, and let her voice be the voice the calm-faced woman used when she was not speaking to Arya. "And there is water. Those who drink it drink what they asked for when they prayed here." She did not say what, because names make things hard when they need to be soft. "The cup," the woman whispered. "For him. If his mouth opens," Arya said. "If it does not, I am only a girl with fruit." She felt the vial above her ear like a new thought. The woman stepped aside. "You're so small," she said, and then laughed at the foolishness of telling the truth to a child. "Come then, small girl. A man has been too long at his work." The inner room was the kind people make when they are forced to live inside the consequences of trade. A place for the body to lie when the hands have been ruined by good wages. There was a window with linen pinned inside it to keep out dye dust and serve no purpose now. There were skeins of thread hung near the ceiling, pale as stuff, as if somebody had still intended to put rosy color into it when morning came. On the bed, the man's chest made that thin sail that cannot decide whether to take wind. His face had become a map whose rivers were rheum and sweat. His mouth had gathered into the habit pain makes in men who do not believe themselves admired when they suffer. He was not old. He was not even much worn by years, only by a craft that had kissed his lungs until they were its slaves. The room smelled of saffron and meat boiled somewhere else, and the kind of dust that isn't a thing so much as a failure of light. Arya set the paper cone on the chest at the foot of the bed, because a child's hands must be emptied of frivolity before they can be filled with something else. She took off her cap. She let the cap slip as if by accident. It stumbled in her fingers the way a silly girl's trinket would, and found her palm again lined up with the vial inside the cloth roll, the knot she had hidden in its lining for exactly this mistake. She crouched. She moved as if she were a girl trying not to look at a dying man. The woman had left, perhaps to fetch a cup that remembered clean water, perhaps because a wife who has asked God to enter her house must allow the door to open and cannot watch it do so. "Please," Arya said, in no voice at all. Not to the man. Not to any god. To her fingers, that they might not shake. She broke the wax with the edge of her thumbnail. She pulled the stopper with teeth that had gotten cherries in them earlier. She held the vial above the cap brim, as if the cap were the whole world. She counted. 1 drop, the weight of a lie you meant. 2, the weight of one you did not. 3, the house had taught her the number. She put the stopper back with the careful, firm pressure of a woman closing a child's eyes after fever. She let the cap be a cap. She stood. She turned and found the wife in the doorway holding not a cup, but a small glass flask with a lip for pouring. Her eyes had that seashell pale look women get when they have been crying without noise for too long, and the salt has taken the color out of them. They said it would be sweet. The woman whispered, and touched her own lips, and then laughed, because touching your own mouth was not a thing to do in front of a stranger. No, not sweet like cake, I know. She brought the flask and held it near the man's face. "Hello," she said, and his name made a breath like a small boat hitting its rope. "My heart. Will you drink? Will you swallow water for me? Will you let me be done holding you to a pain that the god has already taken payment for?" Her hand shook once. She steadied it with her other hand. "Drink," she said. "Drink and be kind. If you love me, if you love our girl, if you love our boy, if you ever loved any of us, be kind to us now." Shh. The man's mouth made an old shape. That surprised Arya. The shape was not the shape of refusing. It was a shape that belonged to laughter from old years. He parted his lips, and the wife poured, and the water found the place it was owed. He coughed. A bubble of sound rose and burst as if it had been waiting. Then his breath changed, not to quiet exactly, but to a kind of work that is finished, the way an arm quits fighting the weight of a pail once the pail is set down. The saffron in the room seemed suddenly less on the tongue. The dust settled. The man's eyes, which had been watching the ceiling, as if there were a speech written there in tiny letters he could not properly make out, looked nowhere in particular, and liked it. The woman bowed her head without religion. Her shoulders rose and fell once. She did not put the flask down right away. She had to understand that her hands were not needed for this particular task anymore. Then she drew in a breath and became what she had been before, someone who knows where the towels are kept, someone who knows the order in which a body is eased into dignity. She covered his face with a clean cloth from the back of a chair. She did it without fuss. She had loved him then. Arya realized that she had been waiting to know. The relief came with a taste she could not name. "Thank you," the woman said to Arya. It was a startling thing to have aimed at a cherry girl. "I did nothing," Arya said, which was true and also not. The water had been the house's. The offer had been the woman's. Arya had only been a turning point. "You came quick," the woman said. "Quicker than the old ones could have come. That is something." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand and made herself a pillar again. "Go. Small one. Go sell your cherries. Tell your aunt I will buy 2 cones tomorrow for the girls." She stopped and peered at Arya's face. "You have no aunt," she said suddenly with curious tenderness. "Or if you do, she is far away. You have a face that makes room for work." Arya dipped her head. She took up her cap without hurry. She tucked it under her arm as if girls put their caps there when their heads grew too warm. She lifted the paper cone and shook it, so that the fruit settled. She did not back from the room, because children do not. She turned and left, and the hallway was a cat that did not care if you passed it. She stepped out into the light that the street had been using all day. She crossed 3 bridges without seeing them. A boy shouted that shrimps were dancing, fresh shrimps dancing in his pan, and the sound grated pleasantly across the face of the evening. A woman sang a love song from Meyer and made the last notes go up and then down again like a sail in a contrary wind. A gull dropped something that was not edible at Arya's feet and laughed in the way gulls do when they pretend they have made a joke. The city did not know anything had happened in a small room where a man named Ulo had entered a job nobody would pay him for. She reached the house with the black and white door and let the cool climb her skin. The calm-faced woman stood in the shadows as if shadows had solicited her and been indulged. Arya made a small motion with the cap. That. The woman's eyes moved toward the place where the lining hid the leather sleeve, and looked away again. For the first time since Arya had known her, the woman touched her shoulder, not to direct, not to hasten, only to say that a human body is attached to whatever courage had just been employed by it. "Wash," the woman said. Arya washed her hands in a basin that contained no reflection. Her fingers smelled of dye and cherry and wax. She washed her face in a different bowl, the one that held the ghost of apple skins. She did not look in it for herself. She watched the water remember other faces. She was steady while she did those things. Later, in the small stone space where she slept, she was not steady. Her bones hummed with the sound of a job completed. She put her forehead on her forearm and breathed into the cloth. She did not cry. Her body had spent tears where they were due already. On a stranger, on a woman she might never see again, on a man whose breath had made sawdust of the air for too long. She fell asleep as one falls into a shallow canal. Slow, with stone under both hands. It went on afterward, as if nothing had changed because everything had. The temple received those who came to kneel. The cups were filled with clean water until they were not. The living learned that mercy has two definitions. The dead learned nothing. Arya went into the streets as Kat some days, as Lana other days, as no one at all on the days when seeing mattered more than being seen. She learned where the Iron Bank's clerks took their eel pies. She learned which bridge had enough tilt to make an old man stumble. She learned that the courtesans' boats made their own weather around them when they moved. A wake of talk, a little wind of color. The Black Pearl once lifted a hand toward a fisherman who had coughed too much and turned her face away again, because compassion is not coin and cannot be given to every man who needs it. In the house, the old man asked her who she was when she did not expect it, and she answered with the name she had been given to wear. Sometimes he shook his head. Sometimes he nodded. Once he asked her what she had been thinking when she watched a boy on a roof try to catch a pigeon and fail. That the pigeon had learned better lessons than the boy. Arya said, "That the boy will climb another roof tomorrow," the old man said, and seemed to weigh both answers in a hand and find them equal. The woman with the calm face taught Arya to change herself with paste and powder. A tiny lump beneath one eye to change the way the mouth is red. A spot darkened to make men think dirt instead of danger. A bit of horsehair glued so exactly you forgot your own hair ever grew differently. She learned to smile with her eyes and be angry with her mouth, and reverse it later without leaving footprints. She learned to tilt her head like a girl who had dreamed too long of dresses. She learned to put her weight on different parts of her feet, so that her hips spoke a different argument. The house gave her other teachers when she needed their particular grammar. The boy with the watchful hands showed her a dozen knots and made her tie them in the dark. The scar-mouthed man took her to the mummer's yard where men practiced pretending and taught her that the truth is a shield that slows a sword when you show it at just the right moment. "Lies first," he said, placing stones on a grid and then removing them all, as if the game were the taking away instead of the putting down. Then, a truth like a coin in a beggar's bowl. She wore faces sometimes, but never yet the kind men whisper about. The faces that hang in the great hall where lamps make honey of their hollow cheeks. It was a place of reverence, and she learned it with her skin, the way one learns where there is a drop in the floor in a dark room. She brought cloths, and she brought oil, and she watched the calm-faced woman clean the places where dead flesh meets living duty. She did not ask if they were real. The asking would have been a child's thing. All rooms are true when you are in them. The waif came like a new kind of winter, not colder, but more exact. She was older and younger in the same breath, a woman with a girl's bones or a girl with a woman's memory. She had the gaze of someone who has lived a long time with a small, precise pain and found it better company than men who promised to remove it. She did not bother with Arya until Arya existed in a category that mattered to her. As rival, as reflection, as student to be made to suffer. And then she began to bother with her constantly. "Who are you?" the waif asked her at odd times, while Arya balanced a bowl of water on her head, while she crossed a courtyard with her eyes shut, while she pressed leeches to a nobleman's swollen ankle because the house had a gift for living men, too, sometimes, the gift of a pain measured and removed. Arya answered as she had been taught. "No one. A girl. Cat, Dot. Nanana. An echo. The waif struck her with a stick the thickness of Arya's thumb each time. Not cruelly exactly, but in that corrective way walls have when you misjudge a corner and bark your shin. Wrong, the waif would say gently. Not yet. Again. God. Once Arya answered with nothing at all. She held the water on her head and made her mind a coin with both faces blank. The waif did not strike. Better, she said. Not truth, not lie. Less, do less. In the market by the Iron Bank, two men at a carved table played a game that did not seem to end. They set down tiles of bone with colored pips, and each time they set one down they took something else away. Money, pride, small promises. Arya passed them many times before she noticed that one of the men lost too elegantly, as if his hands owed his pockets a debt they did not want to pay. The other man's smile weakened the longer he won, the way a smile does when it expects to be punished elsewhere for this pleasure. She watched twice, 3 times, days apart, from different angles, in different shirts. The house had not told her to watch them. She watched because some part of her had learned to listen for the music of men harming themselves. News from the West came by ship, by breath, by men who sold news in the form of wagers. The Blackwater burned, someone said, and the sky on the river learned what green tasted like. A king who was not a king was broken against the hard truth of a city's walls. A king who was a boy watched his men die, and did not know it was the death of other men he enjoyed. Arya listened with the stillness a cat makes when it waits for a high window to be unlatched. She ate a baked custard she had not paid for because a baker's wife thought she looked too pale. She did not ask any man to tell her where her brother fought. She did not ask any man to ruin her with the wrong rumor at the wrong time. It was in the courtyard of the House of Black and White, where the water looked at the stars even at noon because water remembers, that Jaqen came and sat beside her again as if he had never sat anywhere else. He had new shoes. That was all. If she had not been herself, she might have said he had a new face. But faces were now an untrustworthy way to count. You are walking on stones well, he said, watching the way her bare foot spread and gripped before taking another step on the rim of the pool. A girl has learned which ones are slippery. I fell, she said, because he would have known either way, and hiding failure from people who expected it is not a victory. Yes, he said, and did not curse the stone for being water's friend. Do you curse anything? She asked, and then wished she had not asked him a question she cared about. Rain. When there is a roof to be patched and a man is lazy, he said, and smiled his obligation of a smile. Would you have me be rain? She asked. I would have a girl be what the work needs, he said. Rain to wash a thing away. Sun to dry a thing. Wind to go where roofs are not. He dipped his fingers in the pool and made circles a child might make. Not a river, he added. Rivers remember their sources. Rivers want to be what they were. Do you? She said. Want to be what you were. His hand stilled. A small admission. There are days I think I remember a boy who had a father, he said, as if speaking of a neighbor's son. Then I think I am remembering a story I liked once. Then I think it is both. You left me, she said, in a voice that had been waiting in her mouth for months and had not found the door open. It came out small and hard, like a dried cherry pit. Yes, he said. He did not look at her. There was a door. He lifted his hand from the water and watched the drops fall away. A man does not carry child and work and face all together too long. He will drop something. You could have dropped work. She said. Sullen. As a real girl, or face. Then a girl would have dropped a life, he said not unkindly. Perhaps hers. Perhaps another's. Perhaps a door. He stood. His shadow rippled in the pool. They will send her again, he said. Not with a vial. With nothing she can hold. He left. The house did not stir to let him out. He had told it jokes before, It knew how to make space for him. They sent her as cat of the canals, at last. Though earlier than another fate might have liked. They gave her a barrow with wheels that protested like opinions. They gave her a shawl with a pattern that had just now gone out of fashion among women who care. Such women will always give yesterday's things to girls whose tomorrows they imagine they own. They gave her a basket for cockles, and a knife to crack them open that was sharp enough to teach respect, but dull enough to forgive a hurrying hand. They gave her a wooden tally she was to use for counting coin, and a narrower one she was to use for counting the kinds of men who come to buy goods from girls and pay with something other than copper. She kept that second tally in her mind. "Where will I go?" she asked the calm-faced woman. Because some questions cannot be answered by listening. Where men want to listen to the sea and pretend it is telling them secrets, the woman said. Where the Iron Bank's clerks go when they want to feel that they have bodies under their good wool. Where the mummers are, and the boys who think they are the mummers. Where the courtesans' boats cast shade on the water and make men brave in it. Where a girl called Cat could have been born so often that nobody asks which time she means when she says so. Damn! The purple harbor glowed like a bruise with honor. Cat walked its new stone and its old timber and shouted her chant with the confidence of every girl who has shouted before her. Muscles and cockles! Muscles and cockles! She learned how to lean her shoulder against the barrel when a slope argued. She learned to smile the right smile at a man who wanted to be refused, and the other right smile at a man who wanted to be noticed, as if he were not dangerous. She learned which women would bargain in front of their little sons, to teach them how to spend, and which would bargain in front of their little daughters to teach them how to refuse. She learned to insult men's coin with cleverness, and then apologize to their wives with real respect. She learned that the courtesans had names that belonged to flowers and stars and trees, and that the boats were smaller theaters than the boards where the mummers later stood. A man performs to his purse first and to his audience second. She played with the mummers when she had enough coin to buy time. She watched a troupe build a world from curtains and sticks. Their leading man made a king from a hat, and a king's failure from a drop of his voice. Their leading woman made a widow from a veil, and a widow's freedom from the tilt of her chin. Arya learned to laugh at jokes she had heard already in the kitchens at Winterfell, and to laugh at jokes she had never heard, because they belonged to men who had worked all day and needed to make noise that did not require thought. The scar-mouthed teacher put his hand on her shoulder once, a weight like a good cloak. "Watch the pauses," he said. "Men think speech is speech. Speech is waiting." A sailor bought cockles from her, and called her little sister and cried when he ate them. He said the salt tasted like a woman he had wronged. He gave her 2 extra coppers and said that all was forgiven. She put the coppers in the tally and did not forgive or condemn because that was not her work. A boy with a bundle of rushes asked her if she was from the Green Canal or the Red, and she said both because Cat had been born so often. He laughed and said that if she was from both, she was probably from neither. She laughed and said that if he had rushes to sell, he should sell them before they dried in his hands. He ran, and she smiled, and a man in a summer-weight cloak watched the exchange as if it were a play. And she noted him, the way his eyes looked not at faces, but at elbows and knees, weak places where men reveal their impatience. He was not slaver. Braavos would have spat him into the sea. He was not thief. Thieves have their own sense, and it smells like the river at noon. He was something else. She sold him cockles and watched how he paid without looking at his purse, and later watched how he lost money too elegantly at a game he pretended not to understand. At night she washed the salt from her hands in a bowl that remembered apple skins, and went to the room where the brass lamps made green of everything, and reported without adornment. The old man asked questions like the ones he had asked before, but set a little farther apart, as if time were a chessboard now. "The man in the summer cloak," Arya said once, when she had enough noticings to stack into a story. "He loses. He makes a show of blaming luck and shows his wrists while he does it, as if they were worth looking at. He watches knees. He never finishes a cup." "Bendo. Who drinks it?" the old man asked. "The man who wins," Arya said. "Or the one beside him who wishes he had." "Who pays for the next cup?" the old man asked. "The clerk from the Iron Bank," Arya said. "The one who laughs. He counts with his fingers when he drinks, not his mind. What does he count? People who are watching him, she said. The old man's mouth went up and down and up again, a tide. There will be a cup soon, he said. You will not be near it, but you will have set the table it sits upon. Spring made itself grandly known, and the channels brought up the smell of rot with the blossoms. Men drank thinner wine and pretended it was the same wine. The courtesans wore fewer jewels and more skin at their wrists, because wrists are where longing is born. The black pearl nodded to a young man with hair like a new coin, and his knees weakened in professional fashion. Arya learned to mend the wheel of her barrow with a slat of ashwood and a nail that bent twice before consenting to work. She learned to put a crack in her voice when she wanted pity, and a laugh in it when she wanted contempt. She learned to replace caps with scarves and scarves with hats at the right rate, so nobody remembered the head beneath. The waif made her blind for 3 days. It was not the house's justice, done with a cup. It was a rag soaked in something that cooled her eyes and showed them another world. The calm-faced woman told Arya to lie down, and Arya did, because not to do so would have been childish. The rag pressed. Darkness pressed back. She heard everything differently. The house revealed itself in quiet humor. A drip she had not noticed. A floorboard that confessed its loose nail to the soles of her feet when she counted steps without counting. She carried bowls. She emptied basins. She did not strike her shins, not after the first day. She did not know if that was skill or luck. She learned what the old man's breath sounded like at the end of a thought, and how the wife's step pretended to come from the opposite direction, as if the stones had learned to lie for her. "Who are you?" the waif asked on the second day, when darkness had become less of an insult. "I am the hands that carry water," she said. The wife's stick did not find her. "Closer," she said. "Not good, but closer." On the third day, Arya heard someone weeping in a chamber where men had usually wept until they were called quiet by a drop of water. The sound was different. It was raw, young. She felt along the wall and went toward it and found, by the small scuffling noises, a child, smaller than she had been when she left Winterfell. With an elbow she did not know how to place in the world without protruding into harm. Arya sat without asking permission. She rested her shoulder against the girl's as one animal rests against another in storm. The child sobbed into a dry patch on her own skirt, until the skirt learned all it could hold. Arya reached and found the bowl kept there for hands that wanted to be busy, and found the towel, and found a story. "When I was little," she said, because some lies are true, "I used to steal sweets from the cooks because I wanted to know how the sugar felt on my tongue when no one was watching. The cook would be angry and then laugh, and then hide sweets in places I had not found yet, so I could feel like a mouse that had learned a trick. There will be somebody in this city who will do the same for you if you ask in the right voice." She felt the child's head lift minutely. "The right voice," Arya said. "Sounds like you have done the work already." Later, when the rag was taken from her eyes and the world rushed back in all its unnecessary color, the waif struck her on the wrist, so the bowl she was carrying leapt and did not spill. "You smile too much," the waif said. "I was smiling at something I remembered," Arya said, and saw the waif's mouth make the shape of cruelty and then forget it. It was a rare thing to catch her forgetting. They gave her another address in ink, another sign scratched like a word a blind man might be able to feel. A fish with a long spine, stylized, a tattooist sign. The man there had taken coin from a woman and put her dead husband's crest upon the new husband's chest, and missed the old one with a line his hand had made a prayer to for. The woman had brought the coin to the temple because grief makes strange bargains. Arya went 3 times, as 3 different girls, and heard the tattooist talk about lines that will not behave. She watched his fingers. She watched the way he cared about his work, more than he cared about clients. She saw love where he did not. The house moved around that observation like water around a piling. She learned the taste of news from Westeros as it curdles and sweetens in the mouths of men who were not there. Men in taverns made a story out of the green fork that had 3 endings, each one crediting a different man with the art of not dying. Some said the young wolf had grown a tail and swam rivers underwater and came up behind good Lord Tywin. Others said Stannis had bled for his god, and been rewarded, and then had not been rewarded, and would be next time. A sailor told a girl with a shawl and a basket of cockles that Winterfell had burned like a pyre, and that 2 little boys had hanged from the gate like rooks. Arya placed a cockle on his waxed paper without looking at him and told him he had given her 1 copper too many. Later, in the hall where the lamps hold green like water holds light, she held her hands in her armpits so they would stop shaking. The old man did not ask her about Winterfell. He did not say the names of her brothers. He said, "How many steps from the second pool to the fourth, if one begins with the left foot?" 7 to the corner, and 2 more after, Arya said. "And if one begins with the right, 9 at once," she said. "The corner becomes different." "Yes," he said. "So do corners. So do girls." They gave her a new game with the waif that had no stick and no bowl. The lying game. They sat cross-legged near a pillar with faces above them that might have been carved or borrowed. Arya did not look up because to look up would be to answer a question they had not asked with a confession. The waif asked her questions and Arya answered with the wrong truths and the right lies, and sometimes with nothing, and sometimes with the smallest thing she could find that was real in a day. The waif touched her wrist when she was wrong. She touched her wrist when she was right. Later, Arya discovered that the pressure was different. Wrong was on the bone. Right was on the pulse. "Where were you born?" the waif asked, "on a day when it smelled of rain out of the south." "On a barge between 2 reeds," Arya said. The waif pressed bone. "In a kitchen where the floor was stone," Arya said. "Bone there." "In a city with winter and wolves," Arya said, not thinking. "Pulse." Then, "Bone." "You can be 2 things," the waif said. "It makes it easier and harder both." "Who are you?" Arya asked, daring her. "Girl," the waif said, and looked amused, as if she had put a fish back into water and expected it to be grateful. A troupe of mummers staged a new play that summer about a queen who loved a brother who loved only himself, and the crowds ate it because crowds like to see their betters fall. Arya watched from behind the cloth with 2 boys who were not allowed out because they stole handkerchiefs from men who came to clap and needed to learn that applause could be bought in other ways. The leading woman remembered Arya from the cockles barrow and winked at her as she died on stage. Her death more beautiful than any woman's death is allowed to be. A man in the audience shouted that he would marry a dead queen if she breathed like that. Everybody laughed. The joke rolled among them like dice. A seamstress took Arya's hand and pressed it when nobody was looking. All of it went into the barrel of her learning like rain. She did not know from which drop she would be asked to pour later. The house sent her at last to carry nothing but a song. It was not a song the mummers sang. It was one of the canal songs, the kind stone hums if you lean against it often enough, about stones under water being not stones but the backs of gods who had lain down to let men walk. She was to sing it twice through while seated on the steps of the green canal near a tavern with a cracked signboard that had once shown a turtle and now showed something else. She was to wear a dress with a tear she had mended poorly and a ribbon in her hair that had belonged to a girl who went to old Volantis with a man and came back without him and without a ribbon. She was to look toward the Iron Bank's windows only when a certain bell rang in the distance, and then only once. She sang. Her voice was not beautiful. It did not matter. Men gave coin because children in public are the city's conscience, and conscience must be paid. The bell rang, noon, no special hour, and she lifted her gaze. A man who had lost elegantly for weeks at the bone game looked up at the same moment, saw nothing, looked down at his cup, and drank. He was dead before the song had finished. Nobody thought to blame the song. The clerk who laughed and counted watchers with his fingers leaned back and put his hands on his belly and said that the god liked jokes. The man in the summer cloak put coin in Arya's lap and told her not to let anybody steal it. She looked at the coin without looking at it and saw it had been scored with a knife, as if by someone who hates pretty faces on metal. That night, the hall's green lamps were kind. The old man touched the little book with the nets in it and did not open it. "Does a girl think she killed a man today?" he asked. Softly curious. "A man drank something that a man went to buy with money," Arya said. "I sang." "What did you sing?" "About a god who chooses to lie down and be stepped upon," she said. The old man smiled. "Men like that god," he said. "It allows them to walk harder." Jaqen came once more, and this time he had the smell of a place on him that Arya could not name. Not salt, not horses, not the metal breath of a city that eats coins. He had slept somewhere damp. He had put on a new name, and it sat comfortably. "You have become many girls," he said. "Some of them even good." "I'm good," she said, like a child insisting on cake. "Some days," he allowed, with a cat's half-smile. "A man has a message." "From whom?" she asked, knowing he would refuse, and thought she saw in his face a thread. Pleasure at the question. "From a river," he said. "From a wolf who swims." The world sharpened. "Rob." she said. "Because hope is the one god nobody puts a face on, and yet everybody sees sometimes. A man would not bring a king's letters to a house that gives the gift," he said, amused. "But the world is not all letters or all gifts." He tilted his head at the pool. "A girl has brothers. Some of them have more breath today than yesterday." "Which?" she said, absurdly angry. "If a man tells a girl where her wolves are, will she take up a face and run to them? Or will she put down faces and walk as herself and be taken like a purse?" His eyes had lost their patience with her, or his patience had become another patience. "Listen to the streets. They speak of fires. Listen to the ships. They speak of wood." He stepped back. "A girl chose," he said, and his hand made a small circle. "A man leaves before she chooses again." She wanted to seize his sleeve. She wanted to tell him he owed her something that did not have a face. She had learned not to want what people advertised. But this wanting was old. It had teeth. She used the name she had allowed herself in the dark once, and been ashamed of, because it was a name for a man who belonged to no one. "Jaqen," she said. And the word was the size of a child's hand pressed against a door that will open to no child. He looked at her then, fully. It was like someone turning a lantern in a dark stable and finding a horse has been standing there the whole time, breathing quietly. "A man is not that man," he said, but kindly. "A man was. A man will be again for somebody else." He was gone without the door having admitted it. She took her anger to the steps where the quiet ones sit and made it behave. She let it become a list that did not contain names anymore, but shapes. The shape of hunger. The shape of men who watch knees. The shape of women who buy cherries when they should buy turnips, because kindness requires sweetness sometimes to believe in itself. She learned to use that list like a handful of pebbles, thrown at the right moment to make ripples where she needed to see under. In the late summer, when storms brewed to the north and failed to arrive as if repenting, the house of black and white sent Arya to buy a thing with time instead of coin. In a rope walk near the Ragman's harbor, a man had set his son to work too young, and the boy's hand had learned the rope's twist in the bone rather than the muscle. The boy's mother had gone to the temple with coin sewn into her hem. The coin the man counted every night for bread. The house gave the man 3 nights of sleep with poppy in it. In the mornings they woke him and sent him to walk to the other end of the rope walk, blindfolded. He learned the twist with his feet instead of his hands. By the 4th morning the boy laughed. That was a day Arya put away carefully, like a piece of glass that had not cut her. The tattooist died by his own hand, but kindly, and at the right moment, with the little body of a bird cupped in his palm, a bird he had drawn too finely on a girl's shoulder to be endured by a man who remembered to love his first wife late. The woman who had paid coin came to the temple and left it on the stone, and thanked no one in particular. Arya swept without pausing. Some prayers are answered because they are prayers. some because the house keeps a ledger of debts men owe to themselves. One evening, walking home along a narrow lane where the water below made a mirror polished plum wood, she heard Westerosi common spoken not in the slurred, learned way of Braavos, but in the ugly, useful way of the Riverlands. She did not change her pace. She neither bent an ear nor stiffened. The voice was a young man's, deepened by wanting very badly to be unafraid. She could see him by not seeing him. A smith's hammer in his hand even when he had no hammer. A mouth that had been hit and learned to mend itself without losing what it was there for. He was bargaining with a shipwright for a place to stand where the shipwright stood. He had something to trade that was not money. The shipwright laughed. The boy laughed. Steel laughs when quenching. Arya walked on. The city made a file of that laughter and used it to sharpen knives elsewhere. In the playhouse, the mummers mounted a scene that pretended to be a wedding, and was not. The leading woman wore a garland of blue silk and made her mouth small. When she said the vows, children giggled because children always know when adults are pretending. The audience stamped their feet, as if to keep the city from sliding into the sea with too much story. A girl with a basket on her arm who had once been a lord's daughter watched a man in the second row, a careful man, let a thin blade of hate show, and then cover it as one covers a lamp at night. She had learned to see hate the way she had learned to see steps from second pool to fourth. It was a thing that could be counted even when it was nowhere present. The Iron Bank did not notice her noticing. Institutions do not care about the faces of little girls. But a clerk with a careful laugh may have. And later, when the next contract slid across a table in the house where prayers are bought and honored, there was a neatness to the calligraphy that suggested a man's hand that has learned to keep lines straight. "Will she go west?" the old man asked her, not meaning ships, not meaning now. "I walk east today," she said carefully. He nodded, and the nod humored her without surrendering a field. "Girls have taken ships from here," he said. "Men have come from there. All of them wanted to be someone else when they went and wanted to be themselves when they arrived. The god does not move the tide for such wants." "Nenderwanei. I do not want tides moved," he said. "Only boats." "The boats belong to men," he said. "The god will take them anyhow." She thought of Robb. She thought of Bran's eyes gone far. She thought of Rickon's stubbornness like a black dog. She thought of Sansa's songs, and wished she could be sure they were not being used as cages for her. She thought of Jon standing where the whole of the world is ice, and looking as if he had found in that cold everything he expected, and more. She thought of a needle wrapped to her ribs. She thought of cherry pits dried and kept in a pocket without knowing why. The waif struck her less. The waif struck her better. "You do not lie as well when you are tired," she said one night, almost sympathetic. "I am tired of lying," Arya said, and waited for the stick. It did not come. "Then be truth for a day," the waif said. "See if you like how people treat you." She tried it. She went as cat and did not perform cat. She looked men in the eye and took their coin like a clerk and their insults like water. She did not make jokes for them. She did not soften her mouth for their wives. She did not laugh at the mummers because the jokes needed a place to land. She let them fall like leaves do when nobody is looking. She made less money. She made a different kind. "Better," the waif said. When Arya told her about the day without wanting to, when confession disguised itself as a list of facts. "Not sustainable. Men will want you to act again." "I can act," Arya said. "Then act like you are truth," the waif said, and for an instant looked tired in a way that went all the way through her face and out the other side. Autumn came slyly, at first only along the edges of the canals, where a scum of leaves gathered like men at the sides of arguments, not participating, but present. The Titan's fires looked warmer at night. Dyes shifted with the season. Saffron found work again in scarves. Arya sold cockles until her hands knew the basket's weight when filled with coin and when filled with only shells. She learned to bargain for bread. She learned to cut a path through an argument. She learned to say no softly and make it be heard. She learned to say yes so that it sounded like a favor granted to her instead of her granting one to the buyer. They sent her to a window in the green Grace Quarter. where a woman did not die but needed to be changed. Not killed. Remade. The woman had a husband who was climbing to some small pedestal in the counting houses, and his wife had a way of laughing at the wrong time and putting her hands where laughter came from. The house's contract was odd. It asked for no death. It asked for a marriage to be saved with a hand's breadth of fear. Arya understood it reluctantly. She had not thought the god took such petitions. The old man had shrugged. "He takes all things in the end," he said. "We are a polite errand on the way." She went as a servant and broke a little mirror with mild ceremony and apologized richly. She wrapped its shards in cloth as if protecting the woman from further bad luck. She slipped something else into the cloth, a folded paper with a drawing of a phrase in the canal's tongue that meant, "Do not draw attention to your hands." The woman found it later. She stopped laughing so much. Her husband spoke of promotions at dinner. The day afterwards, a different clerk smiled at Arya on the bank steps. A real smile. The kind men put on when they have been told they have moved one desk closer to importance. She swept a corner and thought, unexpectedly, of her mother threading a needle. The thought made her knees and throat into one piece of ache. She held the broom tight and let the ache move through like cold. It left its trace. She kept the trace. Winter came. Braavos takes winter like a cat takes rain, unwillingly, but with an ability to pretend it is a good joke. Canals skinned over in the morning and argued themselves back to water by noon. Men slipped on bridges and cursed their wives. The courtesans wore heavier capes and looked more beautiful under them because lines invite answers. The mummers dramatized fire in their plays and lit braziers underneath to make their exhalations smoke. Arya's hands cracked and healed and cracked again. She worked the seam of pain with Poppy when the house gave it, and with stubbornness when the house did not. The wife's stick found her on days when she forgot which foot to begin with on the second pool. The old man asked fewer questions. He let her bring him answers uninvited, and took them as if he had always owned them. "Who are you?" he asked as always, but less often, as if an answer had been given, and he was checking to see if it had hardened like a poured floor. "No one," she said, and in her mouth the words were less hateful. A smooth pebble she used where a door had always needed a pebble. "And if you were someone?" he asked. "Then I would love a wolf," she said, "and fear a song. And I would put a name inside a needle, and hide it where nobody else could find it." She looked at him. "But I am not someone," she added obediently, and some part of her rolled its eyes at herself. He nodded as if to both girls. It was on a morning when the canal ice had been beaten into slush by men with planks that she saw the Smith boy again, or a boy who could be made into him with only the smallest of changes. He should have been in King's Landing under the weight of a hammer that made his shoulders, or walking a road with a brotherhood that called itself good while it robbed the unwary and wasted its money on heroes. But there he was at a brazier near the Review Walk, warming hands that had learned blister and scab, bargaining with a trader for a place on a crew that was heading for Pentos, with dyes and coming back with tin. He turned his head and the line at his hairline spoke a story to her hand, which remembered it too easily. Her breath did the thing a boat's sail does when a wind finds it and then loses it, a slap without motion. She looked at a small crack in the brazier's rim, and made the crack more important than a boy's face. It was not mercy to take the story from him. It was not her work to say his name. The scar-mouthed teacher caught her shoulder when she did not know she had slowed. "Choose a theater," he said, looking out at the city. "You cannot play them all." "I am playing none," she said. "Then stop acting in the street," he said, kind and cruel at once. The House of Black and White sent her to the playhouse that month to watch Mercy. Not to be Mercy yet, just to watch her. A girl in the troupe with dark hair and clever hands. Mercy was not beautiful, not the way the leading woman was, but men remembered her when they put on their cloaks and went out into the cold, and women did not mind that men remembered her because Mercy remembered women too. She mended hems, she found lost shoes, she told jokes to seamstresses that were better than the jokes men told. Arya watched Mercy and saw what she had to learn that she had not learned yet, a looseness in the body even when duty is a tight belt. The scar-mouthed man watched too, and nodded to himself, as if a plan he had wanted to happen was happening without him. Later he asked Arya what the most important thing Mercy did was. Arya said, She listens when people are not talking. He said, "Good," and showed her how to turn that into a laugh. On a day when the Titan's fire looked small against a sky with snow in it, the old man told her she had done enough being cat for a while. She came to him with hands that smelled of the sea, and told him she would miss the way the purple-tongued boys told her lies they wanted to be true. And he told her that lies would be here when she came back. They breed in cities like rats. He gave her a little loaf of bread from the kitchen, and she ate it as if it were something else, as if the crust were a face she had to learn to wear. "Who are you?" he asked gently, because he knew she was tired. "No one," she said, but inside the word she tasted other words. Daughter, wolf, needle, winter, mercy. She held them all on her tongue at once like a woman who has learned not to choke. She slept and dreamed no faces. She woke, and the house had a new smell. She followed it to a chamber where the calm-faced woman had left bottles uncorked, letting this and that go into the air and learn to be friends. She stood there until the smells taught her something about patience. She went to the mummers and watched Mercy learn a new scene and make a man who played a king look up from his painted crown and blush. She went to the canal and bought a ribbon, though she did not need a ribbon, and tied it around her wrist beneath her sleeve, because sometimes a girl keeps a promise to herself in a place where no eye will say it's pretty. She went to the iron bank and looked at its windows and saw herself not at all, because those windows are trained to look out, not in. She went to the dyer's house with the copper comb and walked past it, quick, and did not knock, because there would be a new smell in that house too now, of lemon and wool, and she could not learn that smell today. In the courtyard where the water kept stars from falling by remembering them, the waif asked her the question once more. It had been some days. The waif had, unexpectedly, a bandage on her finger, as if she had been careless with a knife that others considered sacred. "Who are you?" she said. Arya looked at the pool. The surface said nothing, which is a kind of answer. "I am the hand that offers a cup," she said. "I am the girl who sells cockles with the right insult at the right time. I am a wolf asleep. I am a needle wrapped in oilcloth. I am a song that tells men where to look and then makes them look somewhere else. I am nobody." She smiled, a little, because nobody was a person if you fed her long enough. "I am nobody," she said again, and felt in the back of her mouth the place where a name could rest without revealing itself. The waif touched her pulse. It beat. "Better," she said. "Worse too. That is how you know it is working." Snow came at last like the breaking of a promise. Men cursed it, as if it had ears. The canals froze overnight and did not argue themselves back to water by noon. Children threw hard balls of it at each other and learned which girls can throw like boys and which can throw like the god. Arya learned to walk with nails driven into the bottoms of borrowed shoes. She learned to carry coals in a shallow pan without making smoke and making warmth where the mummers dressed. She learned to be seen without being looked at. She learned to consider whether she would ever go west and decided not to decide. And once, in the market where the fishmongers shout their inventories as if they will be punished for silence, she heard someone say, "Stark," as if the word were a coin everybody could spend and no one could keep. She did not turn her head. She did not run toward or away. She cut a cockle open and let the brine wet her fingers and licked it as if all the salt in the world were hers. The city lay around her like a cloak. The house of black and white stood behind her like a door she had learned how to use. The boy on the brazier laughed with the wrong accent and did not see her. A courtesan put out a foot from a boat, and the whole harbor leaned to watch. The Iron Bank's windows remembered the sky. Mercy learned a comic death, and then a tragic one, and made both true. The waif struck her less often. The old man asked her fewer questions. She swept. She sang when told. She touched a cup to a lip when a mouth opened for it. She tied her weight to the world as if it were a knot she had trained her fingers for all her life. Outside the temple, flakes of snow amassed like feathers in the crooks of the steps. Inside, the lamps turned their oil into time. Somewhere beyond the Titan's shadow, a boy who had been a king sat his horse and made a foolish bargain. Somewhere along a wall Arya had never seen, a young man with dark hair and the wrong name learned how to tell a wind by the way it burned his face. Somewhere in a north that had burned, A woman whose hands could thread any needle, could not mend a tear in her world, and tried anyway, until her fingers bled. The many-faced God counted none of it in the way men counted. The house kept its ledgers. Arya kept her balances on her tongue, between lies and truth, between girl and no one, between boat and river. She set her weight and took another step, and another, and another, each the same and each brand new. A.G. Snow remade the city into a map written in white chalk, and those who knew Braavos by smell and sound, more than sight, tested their steps first with the edges of their shoes. Ice learned the language of canal and bridge, and sketched it with a miser's hand. Cat's barrow complained, wood groaning, and when she left it for the temple because the house had called her home for a while, it leaned against a post as if listening for her return. She felt the absence of its weight behind her shoulder, like the absence of a small companion who had made jokes she had not noticed until they stopped. The house's cool was different in winter, not colder, but more intentional. The lamps breathed their measured breath. The old man's face was a sermon told to a listening wall. He sat with the little book of nets again, and did not look up until Arya had closed her hands to keep them from hugging themselves to her ribs. "You will learn to see warmth," he said. "That is what winter asks of men. That, and patience." "I have both," she said, with the unmindful pride of a child reciting her letters. "Sometimes," he allowed, and the word was mercy and mockery joined by a soft stitch. The wife's stick found her knuckles more than her shins that week, a change that made her suspect she had learned something without knowing what. She wrapped her hands and unwrapped them and wrapped them again. Fingers now a problem to solve rather than a thing she had always had. The waif watched, unamused, and once pressed the pad of her bandaged finger to Arya's palm, as if comparing the shapes of pain. "You don't mind hurt," the waif said quietly. "But you still think it means something." "It means not dropping a bowl," Arya said. "It means not looking away from the wrong questions," the waif said, and then hit her wrist again when Arya's eyes flicked toward the pool at the wrong time. The house of black and white took in more prayers in winter. Men bargain harder when comforts that kept them from counting hours are taken away. The calm-faced woman's hands knew the cups and the dropper bottles, as well as any acolyte knows the daily and the holy. Arya learned to take a place half a step to the left of her and move when the woman's breath changed. She learned which families came together and which sent a solitary member who could not stand to watch another drink. She learned that some men want to tell you their lives at the door to death, and some want you to be a door that makes no sound when you open and shut. She learned that sometimes grief arrives too late, yawning like a man who slept through a fire bell. On the coldest morning of that year, the old man took her down a stair she had not learned, which was an education in itself. The house's stone had a way of pretending that the things beneath it had always been there. The steps turned twice, then once more, and the air changed into a version of itself that had been at rest for decades. Lamps at intervals could have been stars if stars wore brass. The room she entered had patience hammered into it. Patience and the knowledge that men would misname what they feared and then bow to it anyway. Faces were there, or masks, or the suggestion of both, the kind of truth that is truer when you do not name it aloud. Arya did not turn her head to look directly. She had learned how to see without staring, the way cats do when a bird is too close to count it safely. The old man set a small chest upon a table that had known the weight of small chests before. He opened it with no show. Inside, leather that remembered shapes, a roll of something that had been linen when it was woven and had become a different thing by being in this room. Tools that were not knives and yet invited the same care. He did not tell her what they were. He let them declare themselves. "Some faces are learned with powders and patience," he said. "Some are given by grace, if grace is what you call the God's humor. Some are made by craft. All are paid for. A girl will learn craft." He showed her a face as one shows a child a shell with the sea still in it. It was neither male nor female in that moment, neither old nor young. It was possibility given skin. He lifted it with both hands, the way a man lifts a sleeping infant he has not earned yet. He set it upon her palms, and its weight was a surprise. It weighed what it ought to weigh, which is to say as much as the person who had worn it once when their bone and breath had been a single company. "Your eyes never lie," he said. "So give them another truth to speak." He brought a mirror that had lived so long with lamps that it remembered oil in its own silver, and set it at her height. He taught her how to hold the face without holding it, how to marry it to the planes of her own, how to let the line of cheek and brow argue, and then agree. The leather's smell was faint, clean, an old sadness made safe by time. He showed her where to brush a thin paste, as if she were putting the idea of a bruise between skin and mask. He stopped her hand when she lied to herself about how much paste might be needed to make this mouth answer to that old smile. "Less," he said, as the waif had. "Let the work do the work." When it sat upon her, the face did not make her another person. It made her a believable cousin of herself, a girl whose eyes had seen another wind, whose jaw had learned to be stubborn in a slightly different way. She lifted a hand to touch it and stopped, because to touch would have made the magic ordinary. The old man watched her as a father watches a daughter trying on a gown that belonged to her mother once. Pride hidden in composure, a patience that is its own lesson. "You will be older with this," he said. 5 years perhaps. Your step must remember they are not yours." "What will I be called?" she asked. "What will you call yourself?" he corrected. "And who will you let call you otherwise?" she thought. "Nella," she said after a moment. The name had no story in Braavos that she knew. It tasted of nettles and kitchens, and the sound cloth makes when wrung dry. Nella came with the snow to sell fat for lamps. Nella has a cousin in Ragman's harbor who owes her money for a borrowed pan. Nella keeps her hands hidden in her sleeves. "Not always," he said, "or men will think you hide a knife. I hide my cold," she said, tucking hands as an older girl might, casual, careless, bone-weary. It pleased him, or perhaps it pleased the room, which was enough. He made her walk and watch herself walk. He made her smile, and then made her change it mid-smile, as if someone she did not expect had entered. He made her bow, and made her refuse to bow with the same mouth. He made her put the face away. He made her wash. He made her pick it up again and fit it, blindfolded. She nearly had it, and then did not, and accepted the correction without anger. "Don't love the trick," he said, as if giving away a family recipe. "Love the work the trick allows." With Nella's face they did not send her to kill. They sent her to watch men who counted ships. Winter had made timber dear. Men who need nothing are still strangled by scarcity. She went to the dock ledger keeper, as Nella, and brought him a snapped quill and a string for his hair. Tyan stood half a step behind his left shoulder, while he entered columns of numbers, so precise they embarrassed the day. He liked to talk. Men who do careful work, and are rarely praised, like to narrate their own excellence to their own heir. Nella, being born to be the listening sort, listened. In a week she knew which shipmasters trim their manifests as tight as men trim beards when they have chosen a bride, which put down 3 extra bales of wool in ink and then made them evaporate on the water, which claimed to carry square sails worth more than their hulls. She learned that one Westerosi carrack had been in and out, too often with barrels that had no smell. She learned that the ledger keeper had a soft place in himself for a courtesan whose name he would not say, and that he folded his shirt sleeves exactly 4 fingers' breadth above the wrist when he meant to work a long time without stopping. She filed all of it. She took Nella off in the evenings and washed paste and patience from her own face, and said her list in a whisper, and thought of a heart tree that had never seen her mortal face cry beneath it. Hearing her whisper once, the calm-faced woman asked, "What are you saying?" "A prayer," Arya said. "For what?" "For work," Arya said. It was the truth. She saw Mercy again, in the mummer's house, and let herself envy without shame. Mercy's ease with the world was not given by a god, and might not be taken by one easily either. She would put a hand on a man's shoulder the way a sister does when she wants to borrow a coat, and then take it away before the hand could be mistaken for something else. She would laugh at a joke as if the joke were better than it was and make it better. The scar-mouthed teacher, who was sometimes a villain and sometimes a hero depending on which mask came to hand when he walked on stage, gave Arya a script he had written in spiky hand. Lines for a tavern girl who knew more about men than men did, and less about herself than she thought. "Learn it," he said. "Then forget it. Then speak it like you've just found it behind a barrel with a mop." She learned, forgot, found. Then when she spoke the lines to him in the back corridor that smelled of damp cloth and paint, he made a face like a fisherman does when a fish offers itself too easily. "You are too good at pretending you are not pretending," he said. "That is the point," she said. "Not always," he said. "Sometimes men want to be invited to pretend with you. Leave a door open." She left a door open and wished, irrationally, for a time when doors did nothing but keep wolves out and let fathers in. The man in the summer cloak who lost elegantly at bones fell out of the habit of losing. He stopped playing. He took his watching to another street. He was replaced by two men whose edges did not quite touch. Partners who would betray each other when it was profitable, and clutch each other like lovers when it was not. The clerk from the iron bank who counted watchers with his fingers began to come late, and his laugh hardened, and one morning he did not come at all. Someone said he had gone to Norvos with a sheaf of papers, and had been disappointed by fewer than he thought. The city's story told itself without asking permission. Jaqen was gone for long months. He left no scent in the stone behind him. The old man did not mention him. The waif did once, as one mentions weather that never quite breaks. "You like that one," she said to Arya. "Tone neither contempt nor kindness." "I like that he speaks as if words cost him, but pays anyway," Arya said. "Words cost him nothing," the waif said. "It is the paying you imagine." "Do you imagine nothing?" Arya said, reckless for a breath. The wife's mouth did the thing it did when she was deciding whether a cruelty would teach a lesson. She left it and tapped Arya's wrist instead. Not pulse, not bone. Somewhere imperfectly between. "Once," she said. "Once I imagined a house where I was not afraid to sleep. Now, I sleep here." "What changed it?" Arya heard herself ask. "Nobody," the waif said, and meant it twice. On a thawing day when the gutters sang, and the canals argued about whether they would be liquid, a messenger in green and white brought a sealed bit of parchment to the temple, and left before his breath had fully warmed the hall. The seal was plain wax pressed with a square stamp that had no crest, which is the kind of crest money wears. The old man warmed the seal in his palm and opened it with care. He read. He folded it again. He set it near a small flame and watched it curl. He did not need to speak, or he wanted to let Arya ask a wrong question and learn from the answer. "Who?" she asked. "A man owes what he cannot pay with coin," he said. "He offers something else. He offers a promise for another man." "Promise?" Arya said. "Death," the old man said. Then gently, "A girl thought we did only mercy." "We do only mercy," Arya said. "Then she will have to learn the shape of it when it is not sweet," he said, as if telling her she would have to learn a different hand for a blade. The house did not tell Arya who the man was. They told her where his shadow would be at 2 hours after noon. They told her what his steps sounded like on stone that had been patched with tar. They told her that he would wear a hat that made him taller, and that his hands would be drawn to his throat the way men's hands go to their weapons. She went as Cat because Cat could be anywhere, and because Cat was known and harmless, and because Cat could be near a man who thought himself important without making him look twice. She trusted the many small truths she had learned in this city. Which street had a package boy who would trip at the right moment? Which stall sold candied ginger that made men stop dead to taste? Which bridge had a plank loose 3 from the center? She put herself in that world as you put a coin under a cup, and move the cup, and nobody remembers which coin was where to begin with by the time you lift it. He did not look like a villain. Few men who are do, and that is their advantage. He had a kind of worn handsomeness, like a boot that still takes a shine. He had a current behind his eyes that told of money moving between men. He tipped his hat to the courtesans' boats as if he had been taught manners by someone he respected. He paused at the candied ginger and bought too much, and put a bit in his mouth like a boy, and 2 teeth flashed gold. He walked as if his feet had learned their trade on long roads, and now deserved better stone. He spoke, not unkindly, to a fishwife's little son. He might, in some other city, have been a father women liked and trusted. In this one, he was a man who had promised to fail to pay another, and so another had promised him death. He died as the house wished. With no show, with a step wrong in the wrong place, where the tar patch slicked under a thaw's first joy, with a breath taken in too late to choose what to do with it. He slipped. He reached for the hat. His hand went to the throat. His elbow met the angle of the cart that carried dyed skeins toward a vat. He went down with nothing so grand as a sound to mark it. The cart's wheel had its way with ribs. Arya watched from a place where she was a girl being told a joke by a sailor's boy, and learned nothing from the joke and everything from the gap between the wheel and the stone. She did not move. She did not need to. Two men hurried without hurrying. The fishwife performed the durable theater of alarm. The hat lay with its brim bent toward the sky, as if it had always been intended to be a bowl. A boy tried to earn a coin by fetching help and did. Arya sold a cockle to a woman who did not want it, and told her it would be lucky because she had to say something to keep her mouth from being useless. At the temple, the old man did not ask if she had done well. He asked what she had learned about tar. That it forgets, she said. And men, they forget faster, she said. And girls, they remember, she said, and then added, too much, because something in him had asked for a second answer. He nodded. The god keeps what we cannot, he said, with that gentle dryness that made her want to both hate and kiss his hand. The waif and Arya walked that evening along a narrow gallery above the hall, where the lamps made patient bee light. You like the old man? The waif said. It was not a question. I like that he did not make the world, Arya said. He only makes rooms in it. You think that is not making the world? The waif said. Perhaps it is more. She stopped and leaned on the rail. Below them, the water kept silent accounts of many faces. When you go, she said, unexpected as snow in summer. Go? Arya said. The word fell between them and sat down, full of itself. You are not a coin to be spent in one city, the waif said. The god lends you here. He will take you there. She didn't say where there was because places aren't important to death. It finds them all the same. If I go west, Arya said, and the west was a direction, a song, a wound. If you go west, the waif said. She did not roll her eyes. She did not say girl. She let Arya have the word because she knew the city would take it back in its own time. Arya slept badly. Dreams collected at the corners of the room like stacked chairs and threatened to fall. She got up and walked the corridor where the stone knew where not to creak. She counted steps silently because the old man had taught her that numbers soothe. She drifted toward the room where faces might have been and did not go inside because the room had a way of making its own invitations. She went to the courtyard where the water was stone, and the stone was the kind of dark that remembers stars. The air held knives and then stopped. She felt another breath before she heard a step. She did not turn. She waited for the step to declare itself. A girl should sleep, Jaqen said behind her, as if he had not been gone months, as if she had only slept the space between a question and an answer. You do, she said, and it came out like a small refusal to be grateful. Enough, he said. When he came to stand beside her, he brought with him the smell of horses and wood smoke and anger. Not his, someone else's. He looked different in the way good liars do when they have told one too many truths for a day and still mean to lie well tomorrow. There is a ship, he said. A small ship. She has no patience with storms. She will leave with the dawn. She will go to salt pans. She will carry a man who cannot swim. Menderwand. Me. Arya said to the water. If a girl takes that ship, he said, she will arrive where her next work is waiting. Which is? A door, he said. A door that used to be a gate. A gate that used to be a lord's face. He did not look at her. Men west of the sea are bringing wine to a wedding. They go to sing not their own songs. The world fell in on itself and then expanded, in the way a chest does, when a winter breath bites it and it must multiply to accommodate pain. Weddings. weddings, wine. The Riverlands. She had learned enough from talk in courtyards, from the bones games, from the way merchants spend wagers like bread. Housefrey's name had been said and said again with the sigh of men who profit from numbers. Lord Walder, who counts kin like coins. Rob, who counts honor like bread and feeds men with it until they want more than he can bake. She did not know if this was now or soon or one of Jaqen's lies that tells you to tell yourself the truth. If a girl does not take that ship, Jaqen said, she will stay here and learn how to be water. She will wear faces and be worn. She will be very good at it. And one day she will be the one who puts a face in a chest and remembers how it felt on her skin, only in the spaces between prayers. Then, you sound as if you prefer that, she said, and hated herself for offering him the choice. I prefer, he said, what the work prefers. The work over there is not for me. The work here is for me. A girl has a hunger that is not mine. The work may want to feed it, or starve it. If she goes, she learns which. If I ask who told you this, she said, you will say a river, or a coin, or a door. Now, a mirror, he said softly, which was cruel. She almost asked if she would see him where she went. She did not. He would be there if the work required it, as rain is there when the fields have become too proud of their dryness. He would not be there if the lesson required loneliness. She could not bend the house to spare her. The dawn was not a kind one. Winds out of the north had learned a few Amar Waters moods and came south to brag of them. The canals smoked. The ferry to the Ragman's harbor carried men who were already thinking of spring. The small ship looked indignant at the dock, a duck among black cormorants. Arya wore Nella and then shed Nella, and then wore cat and shed cat, and went down the steps to the skiff as a girl who might have been anybody's child and nobody's problem. Jaqen put a hand on her elbow the way a man does to a niece he will not see for a while, and lifted her in. He did not speak. He did not look as if he held back words. He looked as if he had a list and was checking items off. A rope, a sail, a girl. Not to make them less, but to make the leaving tidy. The Titan roared as they passed. He does not always. It is a myth to say he does. But the sound went through her like a cold brought up from deep water. She made herself count the gulls on the rock near his foot. She made herself notice the chip in the stone on a bridge that only fish see. She made herself taste the salt as new again, so she would not tuck fear under her tongue where it would become a habit. The ship pitched. She did not vomit. She held the rail with both hands and told herself to be grateful for hands. Men had lost them for less. The narrow sea was not kind. It was not cruel either. It was the thing men used to get between fates. Arya slept with rope for a pillow and learned again the code of the deck, the way a ship speaks its moods through the floor. She saw no vision in the foam. She had no dream of wolves in the water. She did not decide what she would do when she went ashore. She counted stars until clouds took them away, and then counted waves until they all became the same and let her sleep. Salt pans was a smear of river mud and small houses, and the stubborn habit of women who have sold fish since before they bled. It smelled of eel and net, and those small fires that burn out of doors, even when men would prefer to be inside. Jaqen left her there with a nod that absolved them both of feeling whatever they felt. He did not caution her to be careful. He did not tell her to come back. He had done his work. She put a hand on the rickety rail that pretended to be a quay, and felt the vibration of men making a living against the winter. The Riverlands had not forgiven war. They would not. Fields lay patched and mended with men's pride. A hedge would grow where a house had been, and boys would trap rabbits there and then tell one another there had never been a house. Women patched roof thatch with old cloaks and would cut those cloaks again, smaller, to patch elbows, and then cut those elbows smaller to patch toys. The air tasted of wood smoke that had been used too many times. Arya walked with a gait that knew these roads from far ago. It took her a mile to understand that she was walking like Arya Winterfell. She changed the angle of her knees. She changed the set of her shoulders. She became a girl whose father taught her to keep the good side of the road dry. She kept the good side dry. At a ford, a man with a spear that had never yet been used for war asked where she was going, and would have asked who she belonged to if a boy had not shouted for him, and pointed at a cart whose wheel had pretended it knew how to be a circle, and then remembered it was wood. Arya slipped past with the small shame of thieves, of children, of those who know they carry work in their pockets like fire. She slept in a barn and paid for it by turning a goat's bedding. She did not say her names because the Riverlands would have listened and learned to use them. She reached a village 2 days later, where 5 houses made a room and a 7th remembered there had been 6 when men still counted in neat pairs. A woman with red-chapped hands sold her a piece of cheese with pride and apologized for nothing, which meant the cheese would taste of good stubbornness. Men were making a stage in a field. Not a stage, planks, a platform, a promise, a wedding, Arya thought with the childish certainty of someone who has not been invited and wants to have been. There were flowers twisted into ropes, bleak winter greens, pine, and the wan yellow of straw meant to pretend it was bloom. Someone had put effort into this loveliness against the season, and whether they meant to honor love or wealth or peace, it deserved to be seen. She watched from the hedgerow by the road. A band of men came down it in ordered clumps. Phrase you could tell from the way the older ones' mouths had learned to sneer without deciding to. River Lord's men, you could tell from the way they walked like men born to mud and proud of it, men who wanted to be thought of as part of something. You could tell from everything about them. The songs on their lips lacked wives' parts. They sang to one another as men do when they want to pretend that is enough. Someone played a pipe, and it turned the breath of the winter field into something that could be more than itself for a moment. On the wagon's barrels, knocked their rims softly together as if to applaud. No wolves showed themselves. No crows gathered. The day was in between, the kind of day bad things pick for being less noticed. She followed because perhaps she had expected to all along. She let herself be a step behind whatever she needed to be behind. An old man's limp, a cart's shadow, laughter. She looked like a girl whose mother might allow her to fetch splinters for the fire by tearing bits from the edges of a cart. Nobody looked twice. The men who mattered were busy being important to one another. The keep that owned the field beyond had once been small and honest, and had been improved by men who wanted more walls to be safe behind. The gate was a mouth used to swallowing strangers. There were fraymen in the yard, and gifts in a low hall. A septon, frail, practiced a blessing in a corner with a boy, and the boy's breath made little smoke bursts as he repeated each phrase. There were garlands, made by hands that had chosen to be grateful. There were geese, trussed and rude about it. There was canvas that would hang later to shield wind and eye. Arya watched without owning any of it with her attention. In her pocket, her fingers moved, counting nothing. She stood like a girl told to wait and delighted to be told nothing else. If there was a message here, she did not read it yet. Jaqen had not asked her to stop a wedding. Jaqen had asked her to go to a door. She walked the yard like a shadow looks when the sun learns a new hour. She found the hall with the right smell. Rushes, onion, old ale, the breath of a new hearth. She found the inner passage where the plaster had been scarred by a cart once, and never smoothed because the man who owed the smoothing had died or gone away. She found the second stair. She found a small room that intended to be unused, and was not. The portrait of the lord who had built the keep in decent years hung askew because the nail had become bored. The bed held a man who had learned to wait too long. He was not old. He would have been handsome if he had not been a traitor to his own health. Chains at his ankles said that men had decided the waiting would not allow him legs. His mouth had learned to be thin. His hands gave him away. Their twitch of a skill denied them. The room smelled of bargain and stale pride, and shit cleaned as often as it could be. His eyes met hers and were suspicious, and then had to become curious. He had forgotten how to receive strangers, not there to worsen his time. Ale? Arya said because Nella would say ale and cat, would say cockles and Arya of Winterfell, would say father and a girl who was no one would say whatever the work needed. His suspicion did not leave. His curiosity came to one side of his mouth. Ale, he said. His voice had the croak of disuse. She poured from a small jug on a table near the bed. She had not brought it. The room had. She watched his hand shake as he took the cup and saw the red-brown stain around his thumb and the way he looked at her cap as if it had a name in it. She let her own hand be clumsy as a girl's, and then exact as a woman's when she touched the cup to guide it out of a wobble. He could not help liking her for that, which is how men are ruined. "Who are you?" he asked. "Nella," she said. "For the day." "Ale girl?" His eyes, having worked a hand back into old habits, took a stroll along the world and learned too little from it. He had been somebody. He had fallen out of somebody into almost nobody. Men hate that fall more than they hate death. "For the day," she said again. She put the jug down. She looked at his chains and let pity move across her face like a shadow. Pity is useful. She wiped it away with business. "Your lord has a wedding," she said. "The lord I serve has many children," he said. "He has to marry them somewhere. Do you serve him?" A girl's nosy question. His mouth remembered an old smile, and then forgot it. "I served myself first," he said. "That is why I am where I am." He looked at her again, and something like caution came home to him. "Who are you?" he asked again, more like a man. "Nella," she said, and stood her ground. He laughed, a small sound, as if he had been reminded of a son who could not answer a riddle. "You have a look of another place," he said. "North." "East," she said. "That is the north," he said, the way men do when they dislike maps. He drank. He shivered as if the ale had been made of snow. "You do not belong at weddings," he said. "There will be songs. They make men cruel, or fools, or blind." He put the cup away from his own hand, as if it had been the hand that betrayed him. "There will be a gift brought to it that cannot be unwrapped without blood." She let a silence be her answer. She looked at the portrait with its bored nail. She straightened it. Her step back from the wall let her see the other thing she had come to see. The door behind the door. Not wood, not stone. A door that had been built when this was a gatehouse. A sweet, foolish door men had bricked when they wanted to keep things nicer. Its line was a story still visible to a girl's eyes. It ran behind the bed and down the wall, and behind a cupboard that had been placed to keep nobody from thinking it was there. But the cupboard sat a thumb away from the wall because a man had been tired when he pushed it back. The work is always the work. She played Nella a while longer, fetched the chamber pot for the man, turned her nose aside, cleaned it as women do, and are never praised for it, said a small joke that made him resent liking her more. She left. She found two boys dragging benches beneath canvas. She told them a lie about turtles that made them laugh, and made them leave their bench where she needed it. She found a hammer. That night, the pipes made the yard into a foolish, mad dream. Men danced badly. Women laughed well. Wine went where it ought, and then where it should not, which is what wine does. Arya became Nella, and then Cat, and then nobody, and moved along the wall like a piece of night that had business. The door behind the door took less work than she had feared, because men who once want to reopen something are the best at closing it badly. She found the seam. She ran the knife's point-down mortar that had been more of a suggestion than a promise. She tugged. She pressed. She asked Stone to be her friend as she had been taught. Stone remembered. She entered a passage that had been built when men wanted to move quietly from one side of a courtyard to another in case of siege. It smelled of mouse and lime, and the first woman in the keep who had wept here because she had turned around in it and lost her way. She put a hand on the left wall because men get lost when they forget which hand to trust. She moved. She counted steps. She went up a stair that forced her to take small bites of it, and then one that wanted her to take large ones, as if testing her legs for something they were not anymore. She found a slit where air had learned to move, and learned that this slit told on the great hall. If there was to be treachery, this slit would tell its story to whoever knew how to listen to men's breath when they choose to be irreversible. She pressed her ear and heard not words but the cadence of people arranged in their shapes. The host's voice, dry as a chaff. The bride's laugh, the rehearsed one women wear when they should be elsewhere. The clatter of arms, a brief metal animal let in, and then drawn back on a chain. She could not judge whether this was the wrong day or the wrong night. She only knew it was a night that had chosen to be important. She went on. The passage led down again, came up at the base of the little room where the man had been chained. She waited. The wedding made itself louder. She counted past the counting of steps, into the counting of heartbeats. The hall changed. She felt it. It feared itself. She felt the moment before a storm when clouds meet and agree on a plan. She slid into the small room. The man lifted his head because the world had taught him to lift it at unexpected sounds, whether the sound meant food or beating or prayer. "Nella," he said, and his mouth made a shape that was living, and then remembered to be careful. "Why are you here now?" He smiled. "Small. To fetch a cup for the toast." "For the cup," she said, and his eyes liked the wit before they understood the shape of it. She moved like a girl fetching a chamber pot, and not like a blade. He watched her because kindness is the most dangerous trick, and he had missed it. She slid the cupboard aside, the thumb's breadth men leave when fatigue wins over obedience. She pressed her hand to the seam and found the place where Brick had been convinced to forget it was essence. She tugged again. Mortar whispered. The door behind the door learned how to be a mouth after years of being a scar. He stared. He was not foolish. He was not free either. Chains are the memory men put on a man's bones, and they are not undone by doors. "Why?" he said. The question men ask when breath is allowed back to them with choice. "Because there will be a gift in the hall," she said. And he looked at her as if she had told him his own name, and he had disliked it. "No," he said. "There is bread and salt." She wanted to tell him what she had learned about men's hospitality. That phrase, count even their kindness like coppers, and expect to be paid in exact change. That Walder's smile is a gate. That songs can be a trap if the wrong man chooses them. She wanted to tell him she had seen men die in kitchens with the bread they had welcomed in their throats. She wanted to say father and break and hurt and Nella and cat and no one at once. She said, "Come." And because chains are not undone by words, she went to them. Keys are louder than death. They announce themselves. She did not have one. She had been given passage. She had not been given everything. She might have gone back into the passage and turned away and said the house had sent her to learn the door and not the man. She might have. She did not. She fetched the hammer she had hidden behind the broken plating of the wall, and she made a small joke of noise. And she did as girls do in stories when they break their needles to make other tool. The first link did not give. The second did not either. The third told the others a secret, and the fourth remembered it, and the fifth confessed. The chain protested, turning into not chain. It had been told to be the shape it was forever. She hid it where it had the least pride. It sulked into two. By then the hall had begun to sing another song. Not pipes now. Not men's stomping. Iron hall. Men's cries when iron chooses purposes without them. The portrait's nail lost interest entirely, and let the Lord's face turn away. Arya took the man's arm because he could not take his own choices as fast, and she pulled him into the passage because she had learned to be small in small spaces, and he had not. He stumbled where the step took longer, and she moved where he would have moved if he had learned the passage earlier. He breathed like someone who had forgotten he owned lungs. The world in the hall above them practiced murder and laughter, men being poor at telling them apart when their leaders give permission. She moved without thinking about who was dying. It was not her work to count. They came out under cold sky beyond the wall, where a brush had grown insolent in its neglect and hit a stone 3 men could not have lifted if they had tried. The man stood and worked at the idea of free. He lifted his face into air that did not belong to the room. He made a sound that might have one day been a word. "Why?" he said again, this time like a prayer rather than a question, as if the god would enjoy the answer either way. "Because you will not be a part of what is being done," Arya said, and heard Winterfell in her mouth and hated it and clung to it. "Because the work likes to take a man away from the moment when he would become something worse." She did not say rob because to say it would be to put a name into a place that would only use it to cut her. She did not say mother because the word would become a knife, and she would kill the wrong man with it. She said, "Go," and it was a command. He looked at her as if she had turned into a piece of weather. He turned. He ran badly, the way men do whose legs have been chained. He fell once, and cursed, and apologized to the ground, and got up and found the ditch, and went where the ditch went, which was away. She watched until watching became less useful than not. She turned back to the door behind the door. She put the cupboard up against it again. She knew she had done a small thing and would be paid for it by the god in coin she would not choose. She walked away from a ruin she would not tally, and she let the field's silence hold her 1 minute, because it was the only place in the world where silence was honest. She did not go near the hall. She did not look at the stars for omens. She found a hovel where the roof had been lower than it needed to be, even when men still put straw on it. And she crawled in, and let straw argue her skin with 1,000 insults. She slept there, with blood in the night not hers, with the smell of geese and lies. In the morning she went back to the road as if she had always been walking on it. A cart passed with a broken wheel. A boy sang because he had not had a song broken out of him yet. She put one foot in front of the other foot, until the river made itself a line in the land, and her breath made itself a sound she could live with. Salt pans waited, as things wait, that do not expect to be wanted. Jaqen met her at a bench by the eel pots because he had always been the kind of man to stand where a younger version of himself would think he ought not to be. He did not ask her what she had done. She did not tell him. They let the eel smell be the conversation, and the gulls make the rest. When she put her hand on the bench, his hand put a coin there without ceremony. She did not pick it up. He did not take it back. They sat as if contemplating buying bread, and deciding they had eaten well enough. "Who did you save?" he asked at last, and the shape of the question made her hate him just enough to make the answer honest. "No one," she said, and meant it, not properly. A man who will do wrong later, perhaps. A man who had done wrong already. "Good," he said, and the cruelty was the kind that made a day sharper and made a girl better. "You were not sent to save. Was I sent to kill?" she asked, and made the words small as if it were a walnut she could keep in her mouth without choking. "You were sent to weigh," he said. "To weigh doors. To weigh songs. To weigh one man's breath against another man's finger and see which moved the scale, the way the god likes." "Ben? The god," she said. "Does he like anything?" "He likes balance," Jaqen said. "He is fond of symmetry. He has a sense of humor." He made a tiny gesture, the kind of thing that would become a habit men might call charm if they wanted to be cheated by it. "He likes you." Sometimes, she said. The word would always be there between her and gods and men. They took a ship not his and learned together the choreographies of decks again, without speaking how often they had learned them apart. The narrow sea accepted them indifferently. The Titan made no sound when they passed back beneath him. He was a man receiving guests he had seen too often. Snow lingered on his shoulders. Gulls were bored. The city breathed the breath of a woman who has been awake too long, but is pleased to have company. Arya stepped onto stone and felt the different weight of the west and east shift on her bones and settle. She had taken something with her and brought something back. She was not sure which would cost more. The house took her in with no ceremony. The calm-faced woman showed her where to put her shoes so that they would dry without warping. The old man asked her who she was and nodded when she could not answer quickly. The waif struck her wrist 3 times and then touched her pulse twice, and then did not strike again that day. The lamps sent up their slow soot. The water remembered new faces. "You will go to the playhouse," the old man said 3 days later, when she had caught up to her own breath. "You will be Mercy." "I have learned her," Arya said. "You will be her," he said. He did not tell her to come back when it was done. The house owns the doors. It does not fret over where they lead, only that they work. Mercy was easy after blood and doors. She put on paint the color of health and learned to stretch her vowels like soft cloth. She flirted with a boy too old for her and too young for his hands to have learned anything useful. She mocked, and nobody bled. She took an old man's cloak from a peg and wore it, and made a joke of stalkers who got lost backstage and brought them to the door with courtesy. She learned the womanly art of the broad laugh and the girlish art of the shy glance, and deployed them with mathematics men should have been embarrassed to be fooled by. She was needed for a thing. A Westerosi envoy who had come to speak with the Iron Bank and was angry at having to speak with anybody. He had taken to visiting the mummers every night, as men do when their real business goes badly. He liked to be adored by women he pretended to despise. He had a way of putting his hand on a thigh without permission, and making it seem like permission because men laughed. Mercy did not have to kill him. She had to puncture him. Not with a knife, with a needle of a different sort. Humiliation makes some men kind. It makes others claw. Her work was to find out which he was, and if he was the wrong kind, to deliver him to a new sort of prayer. She let him see himself in her eyes like a younger man than he was. She let him say a line to her and missay it, and corrected him in a way he could like for its cleverness, instead of hating for its truth. She robbed him of a line on stage by laughing at the wrong moment in the crowd, and making everybody laugh with her. He forgot his next words and had to be rescued by the leading woman, who did it elegantly and then looked at Mercy in a way that would have been a slap if women slapped on stage. He came afterward with wine on his breath, and the careful rage of men denied small satisfactions. He put his hand where it should not go. Mercy put one finger against it and pushed it away, as if removing a spoil of fish from a bucket. He stepped back without knowing he had. He laughed. He said she was spirited. He asked where she had learned to laugh so cleverly. She said from the god. He asked which god. She said the one that speaks when men shut up. He did not like the answer. The next night he came again. The night after he did not. Rumor said he had accepted the bank's terms and gone to White Harbor to obtain men he could not obtain if he did not bow first in the right directions. Rumor said he had been found drunk beneath a bridge by boys who emptied his purse and preferred him empty. Rumor said many things. Arya counted her coin from Mercy's day and gave the house its share, and kept the learning. Jaqen did not reappear. She stopped wanting him to. Spring did what it always does when it has too much snow to be angry at. It laughed. The canals smelled of scum again, and hope. The courtesans wore colors that apologized for winter without meaning it. The Iron Bank put out new ledgers the size of small coffins and filled them with careful names. The Playhouse put on a new comedy full of kings and queens the audience would recognize, even if the mummers pretended they were not kings and queens. The Black Pearl nodded to a child who had learned to sell cockles without selling herself. The dyer's house with the copper comb hung a new bit of cloth in its window, green as new grass, and Arya smiled without stopping, because there was nothing she could add there by stopping. The house of black and white asked her one evening, as if it were asking whether she preferred eel or carp. "Who are you?" She took a breath. She let the water's smell go in her nose and out again. "No one," she said, and then smiled, because the truth always has more than one room. "No one and many," she said. "No one and Mercy and Cat and Nella and the girl who counted the steps between the second pool and the fourth, and the wolf asleep." She looked at the old man. "No one and Arya," she said in a voice only the stone could hear. "The god hears either way," he said, and allowed himself the length of one candle's sigh to be pleased. Work came. Lives went. She delivered cups. She listened on stairs. She wore and was worn. She slept in her small room, and sometimes in corners of the city where sleep is a thing men do not forgive themselves for needing. She waited for grief to find a better method, and learned that grief does not care for your learning. She hurt less often, and then hurt more once, and called that a terrible sort of progress. She practiced the lies the waif told her to. She caught herself telling truths in the market, because if you lie all day you begin to miss the taste of salt. When news finally reached even the stones that a king had been unkinged at a wedding, and that wolves had been fed to music, the house did not mark it with ceremony. The old man accepted 3 small separate purses of coin upon the stone, and let men put their fingers there for a blessing they did not deserve. Arya did not ask the men where they had been or whom they had loved at the time. It was not her work. She went to the playhouse and laughed at a line that had never been funny before, and felt the old part of herself lift its head and choose to remain asleep a while longer. On the first truly warm day, when the city shook winter from its hair and men argued because they had more air for their voices, she went to the market without a barrow, without a face, without a name on her mouth. She bought an orange and a cheap ribbon, and a fish she did not need. She sat on a step where a cat had chosen not to sit. She peeled the orange as if it had done her a kindness, and ate the segments slowly. A boy tripped and cried, and did not look around to see if anyone mocked him because he knew the city did not care. Arya stood and gave him the ribbon, and told him it was for his knee. He looked at it as if it had learned to be a bandage by wanting to, and he let it. She went home, because the house is where her work lived and where she had learned the shapes of her own breaths. The lamps were prepared for evening. The water waited. The faces, carved or kept, watched without wanting anything. The old man sat and did not look as if he had been waiting for her to return. The waif leaned against a pillar and did not look as if she had anything to prove. Arya folded her hands and let her weight find the stone, and knew, for a small, ordinary, perfect instant, that being no one and being Arya were the same step taken in two shoes that had learned to be worn by the same foot. A bell rang. Not for her. It rang for the city. It rang because ships were leaving and arriving, and money was owed, and prayers had been said with enough coin to be heard. She looked toward it. She did not count the strokes. She smiled as mercy would. She stood as cat might. She breathed as Nella had. She set her shoulders as the wolf would before standing in snow to listen to far things. Then she moved toward the room where the old man would ask her who she was, and she would say nothing worth writing down and everything worth believing. And the god would be amused, and the city would not mind, and the work would put a cup in her hand or a mask on her face or a step under her foot, and she would do it. And the day would go on, and this was the work, and this was what it meant to belong.